Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto inherited the God Killer's eternal bloodline? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. Crimson Awakening. The kunai sliced through the evening air, its trajectory perfect despite the fading light. Naruto caught it between two fingers, the metal cold against his skin as he flipped it and returned it to his holster. 3 years had passed since Pain's attack on Konoha, and the village had not only recovered but flourished under Tsunade's continued leadership. That's enough for today, Naruto called out to his sparring partner, wiping sweat from his brow. At 17, he'd grown into his lanky frame, his shoulders broader, jaw sharper. The whisker marks on his cheeks seemed more pronounced against his tanned skin. And his blonde hair fell in unruly spikes around his face. Konohamaru collapsed onto the grass, chest heaving. You're not even winded. It's not fair, boss. Naruto laughed, the wound carrying across the training grounds. Maybe if you spent less time trying to perfect that ridiculous sexy jutsu and more time on your stamina. Hey, I've made significant improvements to that technique. Konohamaru protested, but his indignation quickly melted into a grin. Besides, I almost had you with that shadow clone feint. Almost doesn't count in a real fight, Naruto replied, but his tone was gentle. He extended a hand to help Konohamaru up, when a sharp pain lanced through his forearm. Naruto flinched, pulling his arm back and staring at it in confusion. For a moment, just AF. Liquor in time. He could have sworn red lines had appeared beneath his skin, like veins filled with molten metal rather than blood. You okay, boss? Konohamaru was on his feet now, concern replacing his earlier exhaustion. Yeah, Naruto flexed his fingers, the sensation already fading. Just a muscle cramp, nothing to worry about. But as they walked back toward the village center, Naruto couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his gut. This wasn't the first time he'd experienced these strange sensations. For weeks now, momentary pains had been shooting through his body, always accompanied by the briefest glimpse of crimson lines beneath his skin. At first, he'd attributed it to the 9 tails, but even Kurama seemed puzzled by the occurrences. The fox had been uncharacteristically quiet about the matter, which only heightened Naruto's suspicion that something unusual was happening. The streets of Konoha were alive with the sounds and smells of early evening. Lanterns cast warm golden light across the pathways, and vendors called out last-minute deals to passers-by. Naruto breathed in deeply, letting the familiar sense of his home ground him. Naruto. A voice cut through his thoughts, and he turned to see Sakura approaching, her medical uniform suggesting she'd just finished a shift at the hospital. Hey, Sakura, he greeted her with a smile. How was your day? Busy, she sighed, falling into step beside him as Konohamaru waved goodbye and headed off in another direction. 2 teams came back from border patrol with injuries. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to keep me on my feet for 12 hours straight. Naruto nodded sympathetically. The peace that had settled over the shinobi world following the 4th Great Ninja War was still precarious in places. Ninjas and bandits continued to cause problems along territorial borders. Lady Tsunade wants to see you, by the way, Sakura added. She sent me to find you when my shift ended. The old lady can't give me 1 day to rest, huh? Naruto grumbled, but there was no real annoyance in his voice. Despite his Jonin rank and growing responsibilities, some habits died hard, like his irreverent attitude toward the Hokage. Sakura rolled her eyes. You've been back from your last mission for 3 days. Bodyguarding that merchant through grass country was more exhausting than you'd think. The guy stopped to haggle with every vendor between here and there. They parted ways at the hospital, and Naruto continued alone toward the Hokage Tower. The building stood tall against the deepening blue of the evening sky. The symbol of the hidden leaf illuminated by the setting sun. As he climbed the familiar stairs, Naruto felt another jolt of pain, this time shooting from his shoulder down to his fingertips. He stumbled, catching himself against the wall as the red lines flared beneath his skin more visibly than before. They formed intricate patterns, not random like veins, but deliberate, like seals or ancient script. What the hell? He muttered, watching as they faded once more. He flexed his hand, finding no lingering pain or stiffness. Talking to yourself, Naruto. That's never a good sign. Naruto looked up to see Shikamaru leaning against the wall outside the Hokage's office, arms crossed over his chest. Just thinking out loud, Naruto replied, straightening up and hoping Shikamaru hadn't noticed his momentary weakness. The sharp intelligence in Shikamaru's eyes suggested otherwise, but he merely nodded toward the door. She's waiting for you. Try not to antagonize her today. She's in one of her moods. When isn't she? Naruto muttered, but he squared his shoulders and knocked on the door. Tsunade's voice called for him to enter, and Naruto stepped into the familiar office. The Hokage sat behind her desk, brow furrowed as she studied a scroll spread before her. Stacks of paperwork threatened to topple onto the floor, and empty sake cups suggested she'd been working and drinking for some time. You wanted to see me, Granny Tsunade? Naruto asked, using the nickname he knew irritated her. Tsunade's amber eyes flicked up, narrowing slightly. One of these days, that mouth of yours is going to get you into trouble even you can't talk your way out of. Naruto grinned, unrepentant. But today is not that day. A reluctant smile tugged at Tsunade's lips before she schooled her features back into seriousness. I have a mission for you. A- rank. Solo. Naruto asked, interest piqued. No, you'll be taking Hinata and Shino with you. Tsunade slid a folder across the desk. There have been strange reports from a village near our northern border. People going missing, unusual chakra disturbances. Naruto picked up the folder, skimming its contents. Sounds like regular missing nin activity. Why the A rank? Tsunade leaned back in her chair, her expression troubled. Because the missing people have been turning up again. Or rather, their bodies have, completely drained of chakra and covered in markings that none of our experts can identify. She pulled another scroll from her desk and unrolled it to reveal a sketch. Intricate lines and symbols covered a human silhouette, and Naruto felt his breath catch in his throat. The patterns were disturbingly similar to the red lines he'd seen on his own skin. You recognize these? Tsunade asked sharply, catching his reaction. Naruto hesitated, then shook his head. No, they just look painful. Tsunade studied him for a moment longer before continuing. Whatever's happening there, I want it stopped before it spreads. You leave at dawn. Hinata and Shino have already been briefed. Naruto nodded, tucking the folder under his arm. We'll handle it. As he turned to leave, Tsunade called after him, Naruto. He paused at the door. Looking back, be careful. There's something about these reports that doesn't sit right with me. The genuine concern in her voice gave him pause. I will, he promised, more seriously this time. Outside, the night air had grown cool, stars beginning to appear in the deepening darkness above Konoha. Naruto walked slowly toward his apartment, mind turning over the Missio N details and the troubling coincidence of the markings. You're worried, came a deep voice from within his consciousness. Naruto didn't break stride, long accustomed to conversing with the Nine Tails. Wouldn't you be? Those markings in the report look exactly like what's been showing up on me. Kurama rumbled thoughtfully. I've been considering that. These episodes you've been having. They're not my doing. I figured that much. Naruto replied dryly. Any theories? Nothing concrete. But there's something familiar about the energy. Like a distant memory I can't quite grasp. That was unsettling. The Nine Tails had lived for centuries, witnessed countless techniques and phenomena. If something gave even Kurama pause. Naruto was so lost in thought that he nearly collided with someone on the path ahead. Only his shinobi reflexes saved him from the embarrassment, allowing him to sidestep at the last moment. Sorry, came a soft, familiar voice. I wasn't looking where I was going. Hinata Hyuga stood before him, her pale eyes widening in recognition. Oh, Naruto. Hinata. He greeted her with a smile. In the years since the war, Hinata had grown more confident, though. A faint blush still colored her cheeks whenever they spoke. Her long indigo hair was pulled back in a loose braid, and her Jonin uniform suited her well. I just heard we're being sent on a mission together. She nodded, her expression growing more serious. Lady Tsunade briefed us this afternoon. Those markings, they're unlike anything I've seen before. Have you tried using your Byakugan on the sketches? Maybe there's something we're missing. That was my first thought too, Hinata replied. But they're just drawings. I need to see the real thing to determine if there's any chakra signature associated with them. They fell into step together, walking toward the residential district. Naruto found himself oddly comfortable in Hinata's presence. There had been a time when her obvious crush on him had made him awkward around her, but their shared experiences during the war had forged a deeper understanding between them. Do you think? Hinata began, but her words were cut short by a tremendous explosion that rocked the ground beneath their feet. Both shinobi instinctively dropped into defensive stances, eyes darting toward the source of the disturbance. A plume of smoke rose from the village's eastern edge, near the main gate. That's not good, Naruto muttered, already breaking into a run with Hinata close behind. They weren't the only ones responding. All around them, shinobi were converging on the site of the explosion, moving with practiced efficiency. Years of attacks on the village had honed their emergency response to near perfection. As they neared the gate, the scene came into chaotic focus. Part of the wall had been blown inward, debris scattered across the ground. Bodies lay among the rubble, Konoha shinobi caught in the initial blast. And standing amid the destruction were three figures cloaked in gray, their faces obscured by masks unlike any Naruto had seen before. Not the animal designs of Anbu, but abstract patterns that seemed to shift and flow in the light of the fires. Spread out, came a command from nearby, and Naruto spotted Kakashi directing the defensive effort. Don't engage until we know what we're dealing with. But the warning came too late. Two Chunin had already charged the intruders, their hands flashing through seals for a combination attack. Before they could complete it, one of the masked figures made a single, fluid gesture. The Chunin froze mid-motion, then collapsed to the ground like puppets with cut strings. Even from a distance, Naruto could see the color draining from their skin, leaving it ashen gray. What the hell? He breathed, the sick feeling in his stomach intensifying. Beside him, Hinata had activated her Byakugan, the veins around her eyes bulging with the flow of chakra. Their chakra networks, she gasped. They're being consumed. I've never seen anything like it. The masked figures began to advance into the village, moving with an unnatural fluidity that reminded Naruto of water flowing uphill, possible, but fundamentally wrong. Stop them, Kakashi ordered, and now more shinobi moved to intercept, including several Anbu who had appeared from the shadows. Naruto formed the familiar cross-seal shadow clone jutsu. A dozen copies of himself popped into existence around him, each drawing a kunai. Naruto, wait, Hinata called, but he was already directing his clones to flank the intruders, hoping to cut off their advance into the more populated areas of the village. The masked figures paused, seeming to notice Naruto for the first time. The one in the center tilted its head, the gesture somehow predatory despite its simplicity. Uzumaki, it said, the voice neither male nor female, but a discordant blend of tones that raised the hair on Naruto's neck. The vessel approaches. How convenient. Who are you? Naruto demanded, signaling his clones to hold their positions. What do you want with Konoha? We want nothing with this village, replied the figure. We have come for you. Before Naruto could respond, the figure raised both hands, palms outward. The air between them shimmered, distorting like heat waves rising from sun-baked stone. Look out, Hinata shouted, and Naruto instinctively leapt aside as something invisible but palpable rushed past him, leaving a trail of withered plants in its wake. And Anbu wasn't so lucky. The invisible force caught him mid-leap, and Naruto watched in horror as the masked shinobi seemed to age decades in seconds, his body withering until he collapsed, little more than a husk. Rage and shock propelled Naruto forward. You bastards, he snarled, his clones converging on the three figures from all sides. But the attackers moved with impossible speed, dodging or dispelling the clones with casual efficiency. It was like they could predict each attack before it came. Naruto felt Kurama's chakra rising within him, responding to his anger. He welcomed it, allowing the Nine Tails power to flow through his network, enhancing his speed and strength. Golden chakra enveloped him, forming the familiar cloak that had become his signature in battle. One of his remaining clones managed to land a solid kick on the smallest of the three figures, sending it staggering back. For a moment, Naruto felt a surge of triumph, until the figure straightened, its mask cracked to reveal not a face, but a swirling void where features should have been. The beast's power, it said, its voice now a single, clear tone that cut through the chaos of battle. Interesting, but ultimately irrelevant. The central figure made another gesture, and Naruto felt something cold and invasive probe at his chakra network, like icy fingers trying to grip Kurama's power. The nine tails roared in his mind, a sound of both pain and defiance. "Get out of my head," Naruto shouted, forming a Rasengan in his palm. The swirling ball of chakra glowed with Kurama's power, and he charged, aiming for the central figure. At the last moment, Hinata appeared beside him, her palms striking in the gentle fist style at the figure's flanks while Naruto drove the Rasengan toward its chest. The combined attack should have been devastating. Instead, the figure caught Naruto's wrist, stopping the Rasengan inches from impact. At the same time, Hinata's strikes connected, but the figure showed no reaction to the chakra points she had sealed. "Impossible," Hinata gasped, her Byakugan enhanced eyes wide with shock. "Their chakra network isn't human." The figure's grip on Naruto's wrist tightened painfully. "The bloodline lies dormant within you, Uzumaki. We have come to ensure it never awakens." Quote, pain shot through Naruto's arm, not from the figure's grip, but from within. The red lines appeared again, brighter than before, spreading from his wrist up toe. Ard his shoulder like living fire beneath his skin. The figure hissed, releasing Naruto's wrist and stepping back. "It begins. We are too late." The pain intensified, driving Naruto to his knees. Kura, Ma's chakra flickered and faded as something else, something older and wilder, surged through him. The red lines covered his entire arm now, pulsing with a light that shone through his sleeve. Naruto. Hinata was at his side, her hands hovering uncertainly over him. "What's happening to you?" He couldn't answer. The pain was everywhere now, his entire body a canvas for the burning markings. Through watering eyes, he saw the three figures conferring, their gestures agitated. "Kill him now," said the one with the cracked mask. "Before it fully manifests." "No." The central figure's voice had changed again, now layered with what sounded like fear. "It's too late. We must retreat and prepare. The God Killer returns." God Killer. The term echoed in Naruto's mind, triggering something deep and primal. The pain reached a crescendo, and he threw his head back, a scream tearing from his throat. But what emerged wasn't a scream at all. It was a roar that seemed to shake the very air, a sound that belonged to neither human nor tailed beast. Around him, the ground cracked, fissures spreading outward in a perfect circle. The red markings on his skin flared blindingly bright, then changed, shifting from crimson to a gold-tinged red that reminded Hinata of sunrise breaking through storm clouds. The masked figures backed away, their confident postures now radiating alarm. "Retreat," commanded the leader. "We are not prepared for this." Quote, "You're not going anywhere." Kakashi appeared behind them, his hand crackling with the lightning of his Chidori. Several Anbu flanked him, weapons drawn. But the figures simply dissolved, their forms breaking apart into motes of dark light that scattered on the evening breeze. Naruto remained on his knees, gasping as the pain receded, leaving a strange warmth in its wake. The golden red markings still covered his skin, but they no longer burned. Instead, they hummed with power that felt simultaneously foreign and intimately familiar. "Naruto." Hinata, A's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Your eyes." He looked up at her, and she flinched involuntarily. His usually bright blue eyes now glowed with the same golden red energy as the markings. The pupils elongated into slits that resembled neither human nor fox. "What am I?" he whispered, looking down at his transformed arms. Before Hinata could respond, a new wave of energy pulsed outward from Naruto. Visible even to those without the Byakugan as a ripple in the air. Where it passed, the fires from the explosion were extinguished, and, most incredibly, the injuries of those caught in the initial attack began to heal. Kakashi approached cautiously, his visible eye narrowed in assessment. "Naruto, can you hear me? Are you in control?" Naruto nodded slowly, rising to his feet. The movement felt different, as though his body had been recalibrated to a new set of physics. "I think so. It doesn't hurt anymore." As he spoke, the glow in his eyes dimmed, returning to their natural blue. The markings on his skin faded as well, receding like the tide until only faint lines remained, barely visible against his tan skin. What was that? He asked, looking from Kakashi to Hinata. What did they mean about a god killer? Kakashi shook his head. I don't know, but those weren't ordinary shinobi. Their chakra, their techniques, they weren't using ninjutsu as we understand it. Hinata was still staring at Naruto. Her Byakugan active, your chakra network, it's changed. There are new pathways, new connections. Before Naruto could process this, a Jonin approached, breathing heavily. Lord Kakashi, Lady Tsunade requests your presence immediately. Yours too, Naruto. Kakashi nodded grimly. We'll be right there. Hinata, can you help coordinate the medical response here? She hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave Naruto's side, but nodded. Of course. As they made their way back toward the Hokage Tower, Naruto tried to make sense of what had happened. Inside his mind, Kurama was unusually silent. Hey, Fox, Naruto prodded mentally. You still there? I am, came the reply, but the Nine-Tails voice sounded subdued. What happened to you? It wasn't my doing. I know that, but you recognized something about it, didn't you? When those, whatever they were, called me a god killer. Kurama was silent for so long that Naruto thought he might not answer. Finally, the fox spoke, his tone uncharacteristically serious. There are old stories, older than the tailed beasts, older than the sage of six paths himself. Stories of beings who walked between worlds, who could challenge even the gods. But they are just that, stories. Those didn't feel like stories, Naruto muttered, flexing his hand and remembering the power that had coursed through it. That felt real. Perhaps, Kurama conceded, but if it is, then you may have inherited something far more dangerous than me, Naruto Uzumaki. The Hokage's office was crowded when they arrived. Tsunade stood behind her desk, her face grim. Shizune hovered nearby, scrolls and medical texts spread before her. Shikamaru and several Anbu commanders were engaged in hushed conversation by the window. All talk ceased when Naruto entered. Report, Tsunade demanded, looking from Kakashi to Naruto. Kakashi outlined the attack and the strange abilities displayed by the masked assailants. When he reached the part about Naruto's transformation, all eyes in the room turned to the young Jonin. Let me see, Tsunade said when Kakashi finished, coming around her desk to stand before Naruto. He held out his arms, pulling back his sleeves to reveal the faint lines that remained, like pale scars against his skin. Tsunade traced one with her finger, her medical training evident in the clinical precision of her examination. And they called you a god killer. Naruto nodded. Does that mean anything to you? Tsunade exchanged a glance with Shizune, who nodded and hurried from the room, presumably to fetch something. There are legends. Tsunade began slowly. Very old legends, about a clan that existed before the formation of the hidden villages, before even the era of warring states. They were said to possess abilities beyond normal chakra manipulation, abilities that could affect even beings of pure energy or spirit. Gods, Naruto supplied, or what ancient people perceived as gods, Tsunade corrected. The details have been lost to time. But the stories claim this clan was hunted to extinction because their powers were feared by both humans and the divine. Shizune returned, carrying a weathered skur, all sealed with a symbol Naruto didn't recognize. Tsunade took it, breaking the seal with a small application of chakra. This was preserved in the Hokage's secret archives, she explained as she unrolled it carefully. It's one of the few surviving records that mentions the god killers directly. The scroll contained text in a script Naruto couldn't read, accompanied by illustrations that made his breath catch. They depicted figures wrapped in the same golden red energy he had experienced, facing monstrous entities that seemed to dwarf mountains. The Uzumaki clan is known for their strong life force and special chakra. Tsunade continued. It's why your mother was chosen as the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki. But there have always been theories that the Uzumaki bloodline contained traces of something older. Something that predated chakra as we understand it. Naruto stared at the illustrations, a chill running down his spine despite the lingering warmth of the strange power in his veins. So those things that attacked the village. They knew this was in me. They came to kill me before it could awaken. So it would seem, Kakashi said. The question is, who are they? And why now? You're 17, Naruto. If this bloodline was going to manifest, why didn't it happen earlier? Perhaps because of the 9 tails, Tsunade suggested. Kurama's chakra might have suppressed these abilities. Or perhaps they needed to reach some form of equilibrium before the God-Killer bloodline could emerge. Naruto closed his eyes, trying to process everything. His entire life had been defined by being Kurama's Jinchuriki, by the legacy of the 4th Hokage, by his dream of following in his father's footsteps. Now, it seemed there was yet another legacy running through his veins, one far older and potentially more dangerous. What do we do now? He asked finally, opening his eyes to find everyone still watching him with varying degrees of concern and curiosity. Tsunade rolled up the scroll, her expression resolute. First, we increase village security. If those 3 were scouts or the first wave of a larger force, we need to be prepared. Second, we need to learn more about what's happening to you, Naruto. These abilities, this bloodline, we need to understand it. The mission, Naruto remembered suddenly. The village with the marked bodies. Could it be connected? Almost certainly, Tsunade agreed. But I'm reconsidering sending you there now. If these attackers are targeting you specifically, all the more reason for me to go, Naruto insisted. If they're hurting people to draw me out, then keeping me here just puts more villagers in danger. Besides, the answers I need might be there. Tsunade studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Fine, but I'm modifying the team. Kakashi will accompany you, along with Hinata and Shino as planned. Naruto nodded, grateful. As skilled as Hinata and Shino were, having Kakashi along would be a significant advantage if they encountered more of the masked figures. One more thing, Tsunade added, her tone grave. Until we know more about these abilities and what triggered them, I want you to be careful, Naruto. Don't attempt to use this power unless absolutely necessary. We have no idea what the long-term effects might be. Understood, Naruto agreed, though privately he wondered if he'd even know how to deliberately activate the power that had surged through him during the attack. As the meeting concluded and people began to file out, Shikamaru fell into step beside Naruto. Troublesome as always, he commented, "Bu." The usual lazy drawl was undercut with genuine concern. You okay? Naruto managed a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Ask me tomorrow. Right now, I have no idea. Shikamaru nodded, understand. Ding without needing further explanation. If you need anything before you leave in the morning, you know where to find me. Left alone in his apartment, Naruto sank onto his bed, the events of the day weighing heavily on his mind. He stared at his arms, tracing the faint lines that were now barely visible. God Killer, he murmured. The term should have felt alien, wrong. Instead, it resonated within him like a bell struck at the perfect frequency. In the depths of his consciousness, Kurama stirred. You should rest, the fox advised. Whatever is happening, whatever this power may be, you'll need your strength to face it. Naruto nodded, knowing the 9 tails was right. But as he lay down and closed his eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just veered onto a path he'd ever anticipated, one that might lead him far from the dreams and goals that had defined him for so long. Outside his window, the stars wheeled slowly overhead, indifferent to the concerns of those below. And somewhere in the darkness, the masked figures regrouped, their plans disrupted but not abandoned. The God Killer had awakened, and the hunt had only just begun. Dawn broke over Konoha, painting the Hokage monument in soft gold light. Naruto stood at the village gates, pack slung over his shoulder, waiting for the rest of his team. He'd slept poorly, his dreams filled with fragmented images, masked figures dissolving into shadows, ancient battlefields littered with the bodies of gods, and always, the golden red energy flowing through his veins like liquid fire. You look terrible, came Kakashi's voice as the Jonin appeared beside him with his characteristic suddenness. Despite the gravity of the situation, Naruto noted with some amusement that his former sensei still had his nose buried in one of Jiraiya's books. Didn't sleep much, Naruto admitted. Too much on my mind. Kakashi's visible eye crinkled in what might have been sympathy. Understandable. It's not every day you discover you might be descended from legendary god slayers. Before Naruto could respond, Hinata and Shino arrived together. Hinata offered a small smile, though her eyes held concern as they swept over Naruto's face. Noting the dark circles beneath his eyes. "Good morning," she greeted, her voice soft but steady. "Are you feeling any better today?" Naruto flexed his hands, feeling the strange new energy dormant but present beneath his skin. "I'm fine. No more glowing, at least." "Fascinating," Shino murmured, his expression hidden behind his high collar and dark glasses. A preview. Sly unknown bloodline manifesting after remaining dormant for generations. Why? Because genetic traits can sometimes skip multiple generations before expressing themselves under the right conditions. Naruto blinked at the familiar analytical tone. Some things, at least, hadn't changed amidst the chaos. "If we're all ready," Kakashi said, finally tucking his book away, "we should get moving. It's a day's journey to the affected village if we maintain a good pace." As they set out, leaping through the trees with the fluid grace of experienced shinobi, Naruto found himself hyperaware of his body's movements. Everything felt slightly different, more precise, more efficient, as if the awakening of the God-Killer bloodline had fine-tuned his physical form. "Naruto," Hinata said after they'd been traveling for an hour, matching his pace on a neighboring branch. "I've been thinking about what happened yesterday. When my gentle fist strikes connected with those beings. They didn't affect them at all," Naruto finished for her. "Like they didn't have normal chakra points." She nodded, her Byakugan briefly activating as she continued to scan their surroundings. "But when your new power emerged, I could see it interacting with their energy. It was like your abilities specifically countered theirs. A predator evolved to hunt specific prey," Shino contributed from behind them. "Logical, if the legends about god killers are accurate. That doesn't explain why they called Naruto a vessel," Kakashi pointed out, leading the formation. "Or why his bloodline is only awakening now." The conversation lapsed into thoughtful silence as they continued northward. By midday, they had crossed from the familiar forests surrounding Konoha into rockier terrain. The landscape grew increasingly rugged as they approached the mountain range that marked Fire Country's northern border. They paused briefly to rest and eat, finding shelter in the shadow of a large boulder. As Naruto unwrapped a rice ball, he noticed Hinata watching him with an intensity that went beyond her usual attentiveness. "What?" he asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Your chakra," she said hesitantly. "It's changing. Not dramatically, but I can see small adjustments happening continuously, like your network is reconfiguring itself." Naruto froze mid-bite. "Is that bad?" Hinata shook her head. "I don't think so. It seems natural, somehow. Like your body is remembering a state it was always meant to achieve." "The bloodline fully integrating," Kakashi suggested. Tsunade mentioned something similar. That perhaps your body needed to reach some kind of equilibrium with the nine tails before these abilities could emerge. Naruto set down his half-eaten rice ball, appetite diminished. "Kurama's been unusually quiet about all this," he admitted. "I think it worries him too." "Understandable," Shino said. "The tailed beasts are ancient beings of chakra, but if the legends are true, the god-killer bloodline predates even them. It represents an unknown variable in a system the Nine Tails has understood for centuries." They resumed their journey shortly after, pushing harder as the afternoon wore on. The village they were heading for, Shimizu, lay nestled in a valley just beyond the mountain pass ahead. According to the reports, the strange incidents had begun a month ago, around the same time. Naruto had first noticed the red lines appearing on his skin. Coincidence seemed increasingly unlikely. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they crested the final ridge and looked down upon Shimizu. From this distance, the village appeared peaceful, a cluster of buildings surrounding a central square, farmland spreading outward along the valley floor, a river cutting a silver path alongside. No obvious signs of disturbance, Kakashi observed. "Let's approach carefully." Standard formation. They descended the ridge, maintaining vigilance. As they drew closer to the village outskirts, however, Naruto began to sense that something was wrong. The fields they passed through were untended, crops withering on the vine. No smoke rose from chimneys despite the cooling evening air. Most tellingly, there were no sounds, no voices, no animals, not even the buzz of insects. "It's too quiet," Hinata whispered, her Byakugan active and scanning the village. Quote, Hinata's voice faltered. D as she focused her Byakugan more intently on the village. I can only detect a few chakra signatures, and they're flickering. Like candles about to go out. Survivors? Naruto asked, already quickening his pace. Maybe, but something's interfering with my vision. There's a haze over the entire village. I can't see clearly beyond a certain point. Kakashi signaled for them to stop at the first row of houses. The building stood silent, doors ajar, windows dark and empty. Signs of hasty departure were everywhere, clothes strewn across porches, a cart overturned in the street, food left rot on tables visible through open doorways. Spread out, Kakashi ordered. Stay within sight of each other. Look for survivors, but don't touch anything suspicious. They moved cautiously into the village, each taking a different path toward the central square. Naruto walked down what appeared to be the main street, his senses heightened, every nerve alert for danger. The strange energy within him seemed to respond to his tension, warming beneath his skin like banked embers stirring to life. The buildings around him showed no signs of combat or destruction, no scorch marks from fire jutsu, no impact craters from physical attacks. It was as if the villagers had simply stopped whatever they were doing and walked away. Or been taken. A flicker of movement caught Naruto's eye, a curtain shifting in a breeze that wasn't there. He approached the house cautiously, kunai drawn. Hello, he called softly. Is anyone there? We're shinobi from Konoha. We're here to help. No response came, but as Naruto reached the doorway, a smell hit him, metallic and sickly sweet, the unmistakable scent of death. He steeled himself and pushed the door open wider. The interior was dim, dust motes dancing. In the fading sunlight that filtered through the windows. A table was set for dinner, the food now moldering on plates. And beyond, sprawled on the floor near a back door, lay a body. Naruto approached slowly, kunai still ready. The deceased was a man, middle-aged, dressed in simple farmer's clothes. But it was the state of the body that made Naruto's breath catch. The skin was desiccated, tight over bones as if all moisture had been extracted. And covering every visible inch of flesh were markings, the same intricate patterns that had appeared on Naruto's own skin, but black rather than golden red. Like dark veins or channels burned into the flesh. Kakashi-sensei, Naruto called, his voice tight. In here. Moments later, Kakashi appeared at his side, taking in the scene with a grim expression. Just like the reports, he murmured. Completely drained of chakra, Hinata and Shino joined them, the former activating her Byakugan to examine the body more closely. These markings, she said softly. They're not just on the surface. They run through the entire body, following the chakra network but changing it, redirecting it. For what purpose? Shino asked, kneeling to examine the markings without touching the body. Extraction, came a weak voice from the shadows at the back of the room. All four shinobi whirled, weapons raised. In the corner, previously hidden by the gloom, sat an elderly woman. Her skin hung loosely on her frame, and the black markings were visible on her hands and neck, though less pronounced than on the dead man. Who are you? Kakashi asked, not lowering his kunai. What happened here? My name is Itsuko, the woman replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I was the healer for Shimizu. Not that it did much good in the end. Naruto stepped forward, but Kakashi's arm shot out, holding him back. She's marked, he warned. We don't know if it's contagious. It's not, Itsuko said with a weak laugh that dissolved into coughing. Or you'd already be showing signs. It only spreads through direct contact with them. Them, Naruto pressed. The masked figures. Itsuko's roomy eyes widened slightly. You've seen them. Then they've begun to move beyond our valley. Hinata approached cautiously, medical training overriding caution. You're injured. Let me help you. The old woman shook her head. Save your strength, child. The markings have already reached my core. I have perhaps a day left, at most. What are they? Naruto demanded. What do they want? Itsuko's gaze shifted to him, sharpening with sudden interest. You, she said simply. Or more precisely, what you carry in your blood. Naruto felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. The god-killer bloodline. The old woman's lips curved in a bitter smile. So you know that much, at least. Yes, the legacy of the divine hunters, those who once walked between worlds and challenged the corrupt gods who preyed upon humanity. And these masked figures? Kakashi prompted. What are they? Servants, Itsuko spat. Hollowed vessels filled with fragments of divine will, sent to eliminate any trace of the bloodline that could threaten their masters. She shifted, wincing in pain, and continued. They came a month ago, seeming at first like travelers seeking shelter. By the time we realized what they were, it was too late. They began marking villagers one by one, draining their life force to fuel their search. Search for what? Hinata asked. The true vessel, Itsuko replied, her gaze returning to Naruto. The one whose blood cool. Awakened the full power of the god killers. They believe that one exists in this generation, but they didn't know who or where. A raspy laugh escaped her. Until now, it seems. Naruto's hand went unconsciously to his arm, where the faint lines of his awakened bloodline still marked his skin. Why Shimizu? Why start here? Because of what lies beneath the village, the old woman said. In the caves below, there is an ancient shrine, older than any record. The early settlers built here because the land was fertile, not knowing what slumbered beneath their feet. And what exactly is down there? Kakashi asked, his tone suggesting he already suspected the answer wouldn't be pleasant. A sealed gateway, Itsuko replied. A path to the realm where the last god killer hid their power before the bloodline was thought extinguished. Her eyes fixed on Naruto again. A power meant for you, vessel. Naruto felt Kurama stir within him, the Nine-Tails' interest piqued by the conversation. How do you know all this? He asked the old woman. Because I am the last guardian, she said, her voice growing fainter. My family has watched over this place for generations, waiting for the true vessel to return. We thought the knowledge had been lost when the hidden villages formed and the old ways were forgotten, but then they came, seeking what should remain sealed until the rightful heir appears. Her breathing grew more labored, and Hinata moved closer, her hands glowing with healing chakra despite the woman's earlier refusal. Itsuko didn't resist this time, perhaps too weak to protest. The shrine, she gasped as Hinata worked. You must reach it before they break the final seals. If they channel enough life force, enough sacrifices, they can corrupt the gateway, twist it to their purpose. Where exactly is this shrine? Kakashi asked, his tone urgent. Itsuko raised a trembling hand, pointing toward the floor. Beneath the village square, there is a well that leads to the old caves. Follow the red lanterns I placed. They will guide you to the shrine. Her eyes drifted shut, then opened again with visible effort. Hurry, I sense them gathering their power for the final ritual. Naruto exchanged glances with his teammates, a silent agreement passing between them. We'll stop them, he promised the old woman. Wait, she called as they turned to leave. Vessel, Uzumaki, Yumiu, Saint No. The power below was sealed with blood. Only blood can unlock it properly. What does that mean? Naruto asked, turning back. But Itsuko's eyes had closed, her breathing grown so shallow it was barely perceptible. Hinata checked her pulse and shook her head solemnly. She's still alive, but barely. There's nothing more I can do for her. Then we honor her last request, Kakashi said, his voice grim but determined. We find this shrine and stop whatever ritual is being performed. They left the house, moving quickly but cautiously toward the village square. The sun had almost completely set, bathing everything in deep blue twilight. The square itself was paved with flat stones arranged in a circular pattern around a central well, a simple stone structure with a wooden roof. This must be it, Naruto said, approaching the well and peering down. Instead of water, he saw stone steps spiraling down into darkness. And, just as Itsuko had promised, faint red lights glowed at intervals along the passage, marking a path deeper into the earth. I'll go first, Kakashi said, already swinging his legs over the well's edge. Hinata, you follow with your Byakugan active. Naruto, then Shino at the rear. They descended in silence, the air growing cooler and heavy with the scent of damp stone and something else, a metallic tang that reminded Naruto of the charged atmosphere before a lightning storm. The red lanterns provided just enough light to navigate by, their crimson glow lending an eerie quality to the rough-hewn passageway. After what felt like hundreds of steps, they reached the bottom. The passage widened into a natural cave system, stalactites hanging from the ceiling like stone teeth. The red lanterns continued deeper into the caves, leading them through a maze-like series of chambers. Anything, Hinata, Kakashi whispered as they paused at an intersection of 3 tunnels. She focused her Byakugan, veins bulging around her eyes. There's something large ahead. A chamber, I think. And there are chakra signatures, faint but present. Maybe 5 or 6 individuals. The masked figures, Naruto guessed, feeling the strange energy in his blood responding to their proximity. Warming his veins like sake on a cold night. Most likely, Kakashi agreed. And if they've already begun their ritual, we need to hurry, Naruto finished, starting down the tunnel Hinata had indicated. As they moved deeper, the air grew increasingly charged. Naruto could feel his hair standing on end, and a pressure built in his ears as if he were descending a mountain too quickly. The red lanterns grew more frequent. The light they cast more intense. Finally, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern, so large that the red lanterns couldn't illuminate its full extent. The ceiling soared upward into darkness, and the floor descended in concentric circles, forming a natural amphitheater centered on the shrine. Hinata breathed. It wasn't what Naruto had expected. Rather and a traditional structure with roof and walls, the shrine was a simple stone platform, perhaps 20 feet across, inscribed with intricate patterns that glowed with a dull, pulsing blue light. Surrounding the platform were 7 pillars of rough stone, each marked with symbols similar to those that had appeared on Naruto's skin. And standing around the shrine, arms raised in unison, were 5 sked figures identical to those who had attacked Konoha. But it was what lay at the center of the platform that drew Naruto's gaze and sent a chill down his spine. A tear, there was no other word for it, hung in the air. A vertical split in reality itself. Through it, Naruto glimpsed something that his mind couldn't quite process, shapes and colors that seemed to shift and change even as he looked at them. Suggesting a realm where the laws of physics held no sway. The gateway, Kakashi murmured. They've already begun opening it. As if his words had carried across the cavern, one of the masked figures turned toward them. The vessel approaches, it said in that same discordant voice Naruto remembered from Konoha. Right on time. The other figures turned as well, their blank masks somehow conveying anticipation despite their featureless surfaces. We can't let them complete the ritual, Kakashi said, readying a kunai. Hinata, Shino, focus on disrupting their formation. Naruto, you and I will target the tear directly. Before they could move, however, the central figure made a sweeping gesture. The air around the 4 Konoha shinobi solidified, holding them in place like insects trapped in amber. Your interference is futile, the figure said, approaching leisurely. The gateway opens. Soon, our masters will channel their essence through, consuming the power meant for the vessel. The threat of the god killers will be eliminated once and for all. Naruto strained against the invisible bonds, feeling Kurama's chakra rise within him in response to his anger and fear. The 9 Ails, power pushed against the strange confinement, but it held firm. Why? Naruto demanded. What did the god killers ever do to you or your masters? The figure tilted its head, the gesture somehow conveying amusement. Existed. It replied simply. The divine order cannot permit challenges to its authority. The god killers were an aberration, mortals who dared to stand against the divine hierarchy. It moved closer to Naruto. Mask inches from his face. Even one surviving bloodline is too great a risk. As it spoke, Naruto felt the strange energy within him responding not to his emotions this time, but to the proximity of the figure itself, as if it were a predator sensing its natural prey. The faint markings on his skin began to glow, the golden red light pulsing in time with his heartbeat. The masked figure noticed and stepped back. It awakens further, it observed. But too late. The gateway is almost fully open. Behind it, the tear in reality had grown larger, the glimpses of the other realm more distinct. The other figures continued their ritual, their arms moving in precise, synchronized patterns as they chanted in a language Naruto didn't recognize. Desperate, Naruto looked to his teammates. Kakashi was testing the limits of their confinement, Sharingan exposed and analyzing. Hinata's Byakugan remained active, her expression concentrated as if she were searching for a weakness in the technique. Shino appeared motionless, but Naruto knew him well enough to guess that the Aburame was likely attempting to communicate with his insects. Your friends cannot help you, the figure said, noting Naruto's glance. Soon, they will join the other villagers, fuel for our master's emergence. Something in Naruto snapped at those words. The thought of his friends, of Hinata, Kakashi, Shino, being drained of life like the villagers of Shimizu triggered a surge of protective rage that blazed through him like wildfire. The golden red energy responded instantly, erupting from his skin in a brilliant flash that shattered the invisible bonds holding him. The masked figure staggered back, its confident posture broken for the first time. That's impossible, it hissed. No mortal power can break the divine shackles. Quote, Naruto stood free, the golden red energy swirling around him like a second skin. It felt different from Kurama's chakra, where the Nine Tails' power was wild and primal. This energy was ancient and precise, responding to his will with perfect harmony. I'm getting really tired, Naruto said, his voice layered with something older and deeper than his own, of being told what I can and cannot do. He reached out toward his friends, the energy extending from his fingertips to envelop the invisible bonds that held them. Where it touched, the divine technique simply unraveled, dissolving like mist before the morning sun. Freed, Kakashi immediately formed hand seals for his lightning blade, while Hinata dropped into her gentle fist stance and Shino's insects began to swarm from his sleeves. The masked figures abandoned their ritual, moving to intercept the newly freed shinobi. But their movements seemed sluggish, uncertain, as if the presence of Naruto's awakened power had disrupted their connection to whatever force guided them. The gateway, Kakashi reminded them, deflecting an attack from one of the figures. We need to close it before anything comes through. Naruto turned toward the tear in reality, which had now grown large enough for something to step through. As he watched, a hand, if such a word could apply to the shifting, multi-jointed appendage, began to emerge. Its surface crawling with the same black markings that had covered the villagers' bodies. No, Naruto leapt forward, propelled by both his own strength and the gold red energy that now seemed to enhance his every movement. He landed on the stone platform before the tear, facing the emerging entity. Up close, the tear was even more disturbing, a wound in the fabric of reality itself. Edges ragged and pulsing, the being attempting to squeeze through appeared to be composed of constantly shifting parts, its form never settling on a single configuration. Naruto raised his hand instinctively, the energy around it condensing into a glowing blade of pure golden red light. Without hesitation, he slashed at the protruding appendage. The being, the god, Naruto Liz, shrieked in a voice that existed both in the air and directly in his mind. The severed appendage fell to the platform, dissolving into black mist that was quickly absorbed by the stone. Behind him, the battle raged between his teammates and the masked figures. Hinata's gentle fist, enhanced by her determination and skill, was proving effective now that the figures' initial advantage had been disrupted. Shino's insects swarmed around another, seeking points of entry through the mask and robes. Kakashi engaged two at once, his Sharingan predicting their movements, his lightning blade carving arcs through the air. But the tear continued to widen, and Naruto could sense more presences gathering on the other side, drawn by the opening between worlds. How do I close it? He shouted, not sure if anyone could answer. Blood, came Hinata's voice as she struck a decisive blow against her opponent. The old woman said it was sealed with blood. Blood, the final key. Etsuko's words echoed. In Naruto's mind, only blood can unlock it properly. Or reseal it. Without hesitation, Naruto drew a kunai across his palm. Blood welled immediately, glowing with the same golden red energy that surrounded him. Acting on instinct, he pressed his bleeding hand against the stone platform, directly before the tear. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The patterns inscribed in the stone flared to life, changing from blue to the same golden red as Naruto's blood. The light raced along the channels, encircling the tear in a complex web of energy. The tear began to contract, the edges pulling together like a wound healing in accelerated time. The presences on the other side grew frantic, pushing against the closing gateway, but the blood-activated seals held firm. No, screamed the masked figure that had spoken to Naruto, breaking away from its battle with Kakashi. You cannot seal our masters away again. It lunged toward Naruto, hands outstretched. But before it could reach him, a blur of indigo hair intercepted its path. Hinata struck with precision, her gentle fist targeting the figure's core with devastating effect. "You will not touch him," she said, her voice quiet but filled with resolve. The figure staggered, its mask cracking to reveal the emptiness beneath. It collapsed to its knees, form already beginning to dissolve into the same black mist as the severed godly appendage. Around them, the other masked figures were meeting similar fates, one impaled by Kakashi's lightning blade, another consumed from within by Shino's insects, the final two caught in the backlash of energy as the tear sealed completely with a sound like thunder. And then, silence fell in the cavern. The tear was gone, the stone platform now dark except for the faint glow of the golden red patterns where Naruto's blood had touched. The masked figures had vanished entirely, leaving no trace of their existence. Naruto swayed on his feet, suddenly exhausted. The golden red energy receded beneath his skin, the markings fading to near invisibility once more. Hinata was at his side instantly, supporting him with a gentle hand on his arm. "Did we win?" he asked, voice rough with fatigue. Kakashi approached, deactivating his Sharingan and pulling his headband down to cover it once more. "For now," he said. "You closed the gateway. Whatever was trying to come through has been denied entry to our world. But this isn't over, is it?" Naruto looked down at his hand, where the cut was already healing thanks to his Uzumaki vitality and Kurama's influence. "They called me the vessel. Said I carried a power meant to challenge gods. The god-killer bloodline," Shino said, adjusting his glasses. "Why? Because legends often contain kernels of truth, and your display of power was consistent. With the stories of beings who could affect divine entities." Hinata's hand tightened slightly on Naruto's arm. "Whatever it means," she said firmly, "you're still you, Naruto. This power is part of you, just like the Nine Tails. It doesn't define you, you define how to use it." Her words eased something in Naruto's chest. He managed a small smile, grateful for her understanding and support. "We should return to the surface," Kakashi suggested. "Report to Lady Tsunade what we've found. And," he glanced around the cavern, "perhaps bring a team back to secure this shrine. If there are other gateways, other servants of these gods, they may try again." As they made their way back through the tunnels, following the red lanterns in reverse, Naruto found himself walking beside Hinata. The adrenaline of battle had faded, leaving him acutely aware of her presence, of the quiet strength she displayed in the cavern. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what you did back there. For what you said." She glanced at him, a faint blush coloring her cheeks despite the gravity of their situation. "I meant it," she replied. "You've always been more than the Nine Tails Jinchuriki. You'll be more than the God Killer too." Naruto nodded slowly, considering her words. "I don't know what this means, for me, for Konoha. If there really are gods out there who want me dead because of some ancient bloodline, then we face them together," Hinata said with unexpected firmness. "You're not alone, Naruto. You never have been." The sincerity in her voice struck him deeply. He'd spent so much of his childhood isolated, feared for the power he contained. The thought of facing another such burden should have been terrifying. But looking at Hinata's determined expression, at Kakashi and Shino walking ahead of them, Naruto realized that things were different now. Whatever this god-killer bloodline meant, whatever challenges it might bring, he wouldn't face them alone. They emerged from the well as dawn was breaking over Shimizu. The village looked different in the clear morning light, still abandoned, still marked by tragedy, but somehow less oppressive now that the masked figures and their divine masters had been thwarted. "We should check on the old woman," Naruto suggested. "Etsuko. See if she..." He didn't need to finish the thought. They all knew the likelihood that she had survived the night was slim. Still, they made their way back to the house where they'd left her. To their surprise, her body was gone. No trace remained of the elderly guardian, not even an impression in the dust where she had sat. "Strange," Kakashi murmured, examining the spot. "No signs of struggle or movement." "Perhaps," Shino suggested, "she was more than she appeared." "Why?" "Because a family tasked with guarding an ancient shrine for generations might possess abilities beyond those of ordinary humans. It was as good an explanation as any. Whatever the truth, they would likely never know." "We should start back to Konoha," Kakashi decided. "Lady Tsunade will want a full report, and we need to arrange for the proper handling of the villagers' remains. As they prepared to depart, Naruto found himself drawn to the edge of the village. Looking back at the quiet houses and the well that led to the ancient shrine beneath. A chapter had closed here, but he sensed that a much larger story was just beginning, one that would lead him far from the familiar paths he had planned to walk. "Ready?" Hinata asked, appearing at his side. Naruto took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." Together, they turned away from Shimizu and began the journey home, leaving behind the sight of Naruto's first encounter with his divine heritage, but carrying with them the knowledge that the God Killer had returned to the world. And nothing would be the same again. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Divine Hunters. 3 days after returning from Shimizu, Naruto stood at the center of a specialized sealing chamber beneath the Hokage Tower. Concentric circles of intricate symbols surrounded him, their edges gleaming with chakra infused by Konoha's most skilled fuinjutsu experts. Lady Tsunade herself had overseen the preparations, her face grim with concentration as she activated the final sequence. "Hold still," she instructed, though Naruto hadn't moved a muscle. "This diagnostic seal should help us understand what's happening to your chakra network." Naruto nodded, keeping his breathing steady as the innermost circle began to glow beneath his feet. The golden red energy that had erupted so dramatically in Shimizu had remained dormant since their return. The markings on his skin barely visible even to Hinata's Byakugan. But everyone, from the Hokage to Naruto himself, knew it was still there, waiting. The seal activated fully, sending tendrils of blue-white chakra spiraling up around Naruto's body. He felt a gentle tingling sensation as the diagnostic jutsu mapped his chakra pathways, identifying anomalies and changes. Tsunade circled him slowly, her medical expertise allowing her to interpret the patterns forming in the air around him. Shizune stood nearby with scrolls ready to record the findings, while Kashi and several Anbu remained at the chamber's perimeter as a precaution. "Fascinating," Tsunade murmured, pausing to examine a particularly complex knot of energy near Naruto's heart. "Your chakra network is rewiring itself, creating completely new pathways alongside the traditional ones. Is that bad?" Naruto asked, careful not to move. "Not bad," she replied thoughtfully. "Just unprecedented. These new pathways seem to be designed to channel a different type of energy, something more fundamental than chakra as we understand it." From his position against the wall, Kakashi spoke up. "The God Killer's power." The old woman in Shimizu suggested it predated chakra itself. Tsunade nodded, continuing her examination. "That would be consistent with what we're seeing. Naruto's body is adapting to channel both traditional chakra and this divine energy, for lack of a better term." The diagnostic jutsu completed its cycle, the glowing tendrils receding back into the seal. Naruto relaxed slightly, rolling his shoulders to ease the tension that had built up during the examination. "So what's the verdict?" he asked. "Am I going to start glowing every time I get angry?" Tsunade gave him a measured look. "Your condition is stable for now. The integration is happening gradually, which is probably a good thing. Too rapid a change might have overwhelmed your system." "What about the 9 tails?" Shizune asked, finishing her notes. "How is this affecting the seal?" "That's the most surprising part," Tsunade replied. "The 4th Hokage's seal appears to be adapting. Almost as if Chi was designed with this possibility in mind." Naruto blinked in surprise. "You think my father knew about this bloodline?" "I doubt it," Kakashi interjected. "But Minato was a sealing genius. He created a flexible system that could evolve with you as you grew. It's possible he built in contingencies for unknown factors. Or," Tsunade added, "the God Killer bloodline is influencing the seal itself, reshaping it to accommodate the dual energies you now carry." Either way, it was another reminder of the legacy Naruto had inherited, not just as the 4th Hokage's son or the 9 tails Jinchuriki, but now as the heir to an ancient lineage of beings powerful enough to challenge gods. "So what happens now?" he asked as Tsunade signaled that he could step out of the sealing circle. "Now," the Hokage said firmly, "you train. Learn to control this power before it controls you." She turned to Kakashi. "I want you to work with him daily. Focus on chakra control exercises first. Let's see if the same principles apply to this divine energy." Kakashi nodded. "I've already been thinking about an approach." Though I suspect we'll need to adapt as we go. What about the mission reports? Naruto asked. Any sign of more of those masked figures? Tsunade's expression darkened. Nothing concrete, but we've increased border patrols and sent messages to the other hidden villages to be on alert. If these servants are targeting you specifically, they'll likely strike again once they regroup. Naruto absorbed this soberly. The implications went beyond his personal safety. Everyone around him cool. D potentially become targets if these divine entities were determined to eliminate the Godkiller bloodline. There's one more thing, Tsunade said, her tone suggesting she'd saved the most complicated news for last. A messenger arrived this morning from a settlement near the Land of Rivers border. They've reported phenomena similar to what happened in Shimizu, people disappearing, strange markings, unnatural weather patterns. Naruto straightened, instantly alert. Another gateway, possibly, or something else related to these divine entities. Either way, I'm sending a team to investigate. She fixed Naruto with a stern look. And yes, you'll be part of it. This clearly involves you directly. But you won't be going alone. Kakashi again, Naruto guessed. No, he's needed here to coordinate our defensive preparations. Tsunade handed him a scroll. These are your team assignments and mission parameters. You leave tomorrow at dawn. Naruto unrolled the scroll, scanning the contents. His eyebrows rose in surprise at the team roster. Hinata I expected, but... He looked up at Tsunade. You're sending me with Tenten and Ino. Not exactly our usual squad formations. This isn't a usual situation, Tsunade replied simply. Tenten's expertise with sealing weapons may prove useful if you encounter more divine servants. And Ino's mind techniques could give us insight into their nature if you manage to capture one. It made sense, though Naruto couldn't shake the feeling that Tsunade was being strategic about keeping certain shinobi close to him. Hinata's Byakugan had already proved valuable in monitoring the changes in his chakra network. Tenten and Ino were both skilled jonin with abilities that complemented his own unpredictable new powers. One last thing, Tsunade said as the meeting concluded. Until we better understand what we're dealing with, knowledge of your God-Killer bloodline remains classified. Outside this room, only your mission team will be fully briefed. Naruto nodded, though the secrecy felt uncomfortably familiar, a reminder of his childhood when the truth about the Nine Tails had been kept from him. But this time, at least, he understood the necessity. If word spread about a Konoha shinobi with the power to challenge gods, it would attract attention from quarters far beyond the masked servants they'd already encountered. As Naruto left the Hokage Tower, squinting in the bright afternoon sunlight, he found Hinata waiting near the entrance. She straightened when she saw him, a question in her pale eyes. Everything's fine, he assured her, falling into step beside her as they walked toward the village center. The diagnostic seals showed what we already suspected. My chakra network is changing to accommodate this new energy. Hinata nodded, relieved. I was worried. Your chakra has been fluctuating since we returned from Shimizu. Even when you're at rest. You've been watching me with your Byakugan? Naruto asked, curious rather than accusatory. A faint blush touched her cheeks. Lady Tsunade asked me to monitor the changes. Since I saw how your energy interacted with those masked figures, she thought I might notice patterns or anomalies. And have you? Only that the new pathways seem most active when you're experiencing strong emotions. She hesitated. Especially protective ones. Naruto considered this as they navigated the busy streets. It aligned with what he'd felt in Shimizu. The power had surged most strongly when his friends were threatened, when his desire to protect them had overridden everything else. Did you get the mission scroll? He asked, changing the subject. Hinata nodded. Land of Rivers. Tenten and Ino as well. She glanced at him. It feels deliberate, the team composition. You noticed that too, huh? Naruto grinned wryly. Granny Tsunade's not being subtle about keeping people with useful abilities close to me. It's more than that, Hinata said thoughtfully. Ino, Tenten, and I. We work well together. We've trained as a unit before when Kurenai-sensei was developing new reconnaissance protocols. This was news to Naruto. Really, I never knew that. It was last year, while you were on that extended mission to the Land of Iron. Hinata smiled slightly. We developed some effective combination techniques. Naruto felt a sudden pang of curiosity about what he'd missed during his time away from the village. He'd been so focused on his own path, his own growth, that he sometimes forgot how others were evolving in his absence. "Well, I'm glad you'll be there," he said sincerely. "Your Byakugan has been the only thing that can see through whatever illusions or techniques these divine servants use." They paused at a crossroads, where their paths would naturally diverge, Hinata toward the Hyuga compound. Naruto toward his apartment. "I should go prepare for tomorrow," Hinata said. "Dawn comes early." Naruto nodded, but found himself reluctant to end their conversation. "Actually, would you want to get some ramen first? I could use the company, and we could talk about the mission." The invitation surprised them both. Naruto wasn't sure why he'd asked, only that the thought of spending the evening alone with his swirling thoughts about divine bloodlines and godly threats seemed suddenly unbearable. Hinata's surprise melted into a warm smile. "I'd like that," she said simply. As they changed course toward Ichiraku, Naruto felt a small knot of tension ease in his chest. Whatever lay ahead in the land of rivers, whatever this godkiller bloodline ultimately meant for his future, at least he wouldn't face it entirely alone. Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of gold and crimson as 4 shinobi gathered at Konoha's main gate. Naruto arrived last, yawning widely as he approached his assembled team. "Sorry," he mumbled, adjusting the pack on his shoulders. "Overslept." Ino Yamanaka rolled her eyes, though there was more amusement than irritation in the gesture. "Some things never change. Good to know that even awakening some legendary bloodline hasn't improved your punctuality, Naruto." Her light tone belied the seriousness of their mission. Rikunoichi had been fully briefed the previous evening on the events in Shimizu and the nature of Naruto's emerging abilities. That they could joke about it was a testament to their professionalism. And perhaps to the bonds formed through years of shared experiences. "Are we ready?" Tenten asked, checking her scrolls one final time. The weapons specialist had come prepared, with twice her usual arsenal sealed and ready for deployment. Extra attention had been paid to her collection of sealing weapons, tools specifically designed to trap or contain various types of chakra. Hinata nodded, activating her Byakugan briefly to scan the surrounding area. "The route is clear. We should be able to reach the land of River's border by nightfall if we maintain a steady pace." Naruto stretched, feeling the now familiar warmth of the godkiller energy shifting beneath his skin. It had been more active since the diagnostic session, responding to his consciousness like a slumbering animal rousing itself. "Let's move," he said, taking point as they leapt into the trees surrounding Konoha and began their journey southwest toward the land of rivers. They traveled in formation, with Hinata's Byakugan providing periodic reconnaissance sweeps, Tenten watching their flanks, and Ino maintaining the rear position where her sensing abilities could detect any pursuit. The forest gave way to rolling hills. As they crossed into the border regions by midday, stopping only briefly to rest and eat. "So," Ino said during their short break, fixing Naruto with an appraising look, "what's it like?" "This divine energy thing." Naruto considered the question, absently rubbing his forearm where the markings lay dormant beneath his skin. "It's different from chakra. Deeper somehow. Like it's always been there, just waiting to wake up." "And the 9 tails?" Tenten asked. "How does it feel about sharing space with another power source?" "Kurama's been surprisingly quiet about the whole thing," Naruto admitted. "I think it's as confused as I am. These energies aren't supposed to exist together, but somehow they're finding a balance." Hinata, who had been scanning the horizon, turned back to the group. Quote, "The settlement should be just beyond the next ridge. I can see buildings, but..." She frowned, concentrating. "There's a disturbance in the air, similar to what we encountered in Shimizu. It's interfering with my vision." They packed up quickly and continued their journey, approaching more cautiously as they neared their destination. The settlement, little more than a village, really, lay nestled in a valley where a river had carved a path through the rocky terrain. From their vantage point on the ridge, they could see perhaps 30 buildings clustered around a central marketplace, with scattered farmhouses in the surrounding fields. Unlike Shimizu, there were signs of life, people moving about, smoke rising from chimneys, children playing near the riverbank. But even from a distance, something felt wrong. The movements were too mechanical, the activities too routine. Like actors performing roles they'd rehearsed but didn't fully understand. Something's not right, Ino murmured, her sing abilities picking up abnormalities even without Hinata's visual confirmation. The chakra patterns down there, they're distorted. Almost superimposed, like one signature laid over another. Possessed, Tenten suggested grimly, her hand moving to one of her scrolls. Are controlled, Naruto said, feeling the godkiller energy responding to whatever awaited them below. The faint markings on his skin pulsed once, then settled again. Like a predator catching a distant scent. They approached the village openly but cautiously, not wanting to appear hostile if there were indeed innocent people caught in whatever was happening. As they drew closer, villagers turned to watch their approach with unnervingly synchronized movements. Shinobi from the Leaf called out a middle-aged man who stepped forward from the gathering crowd. We've been expecting you. Naruto exchanged wary glances with his teammates. No messenger had been sent ahead to announce their arrival. We received reports of disturbances in this area, he replied, keeping his tone neutral. Is everything all right here? The man smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. Perfectly fine. Just a small adjustment period. Please, come. Our elder would like to speak with you. As the man turned to lead them into the village, Hinata moved closer to Naruto. Their chakra networks, she whispered, her Byakugan acti. Vague but partially concealed by her lowered head. They're all marked with the same patterns we saw in Shimizu, but they're still alive, still functioning. How is that possible? Naruto whispered back. In Shimizu, the marks killed people. Drained them completely. I don't know. But the marks are different. More like overlays than burns. It's as if something is riding along with their own chakra. The implications were disturbing. In Shimizu, the masked figures had simply killed and drained their victims. Here, they appeared to have found a way to co-opt living humans, using them while keeping them alive. Their guide led them to the largest building in the village center, a two-story structure that might have served as both meeting hall and administrative office. Inside, seated in a high-backed chair that resembled a throne more than village furniture, was an elderly woman. Unlike the blank-eyed villagers, her gaze was sharp and aware, filled with an intelligence that seemed to look through rather than at the Konoha shinobi. She wore simple clothing, but around her neck hung a pendant that immediately caught Naruto's attention, a stone disc inscribed with symbols similar to those that had marked the shrine in Shimizu. Welcome, Shinobi of the Leaf, she said, her voice carrying the same discordant quality as the masked figures. And especially you, vessel of the god-killer bloodline. How convenient that you've delivered yourself to us. Naruto tensed, feeling his teammates shift into defensive positions around him. Who are you? He demanded. What have you done to these people? The woman smiled, the expression cold and alien on her weathered face. I am Akari, or rather, this body once belonged to one called Akari. I am merely borrowing it, along with the others in this quaint settlement. You're possessing them, Ino said, her voice tight with anger. The Yamanaka, with their mind transfer techniques, held particular disdain for those who violated the sanctity of others' consciousness. Such a crude term, Akari replied. I prefer to think of it as enlightening them. These vessels now serve a higher purpose, preparing the way for my master's return. The gods you serve, Naruto said, connecting the pieces, the same ones who sent those masked figures to Shimizu. Akari's smile widened. You understand more than I expected, vessel. Yes, the divine order grows impatient. The gateway you closed in Shimizu was merely one of several. My task here has been to prepare a more sustainable approach. By turning people into puppets, Tenten asked, disgust evident in her tone. By elevating them, Akari corrected. These vessels remain alive, their bodies and skills intact, but guided by fragments of divine will. More efficient than the empty masks, don't you agree? And less conspicuous. Quote, as she spoke, villagers had filed into the building behind them, blocking the exit. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, their expressions blank but their eyes fixed on the Konoha shinobi with predatory focus. You won't leave this place, Akari said, rising from her chair. The vessel will be cleansed of the abominable bloodline, and you three will join our congregation. The divine order has need of skilled servants. Naruto felt the god-killer energy surge in response to the threat, the markings on his skin beginning to glow faintly beneath his sleeves. Beside him, Hinata's Byakugan was fully activated, Tenten had a scroll half unrolled in her hand, and Ino's fingers were positioned for her clan's techniques. Stand down, Naruto warned, addressing Akari directly. We don't want to hurt these people. They're innocent victims in whatever game you're playing. Akari laughed, the sound echoing strangely as if multiple voices were layered within it. Innocent. There is no such thing in the eyes of the divine order. All mortals are merely potential vessels, some more valuable than others. She raised her hand, and the villagers moved forward as one. Their movements fluid but somehow wrong, like marionettes controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. We need to retreat, Hinata said urgently. There are too many civilians. We can't fight without hurting them. Naruto nodded grimly. Back door. Now. They moved as one, years of training allowing them to coordinate without explicit instructions. Tenten unrolled her scroll fully, summoning a barrage of blunted weapons that created chaos but caused minimal harm. Ino performed a quick series of hand seals, casting a disorienting genjutsu that confused the villagers' movements. Hinata took point, her gentle fist allowing her to temporarily disable rather than injure those who came too close. Naruto brought up the rear, keeping himself between his teammates and Akari, who watched their retreat with amused detachment. Run if you wish, vessel, she called after them. It changes nothing. The divine order has found you now, and this world has many gateways. Many vessels waiting to serve. They burst through the back door of the building, emerging into an alley between structures. Ahead lay the outskirts of the village and the safety of the surrounding wilderness. We need to regroup, Naruto said as they ran. Figure out what we're dealing with and how to help these people. But before they could reach the village edge, the ground before them erupted, dirt and stone flying upward as something massive broke through from below. They skidded to a halt, weapons ready, as the dust cleared to reveal a monstrous figure. Unlike the possessed villagers or even the masked figures from Shimizu, this entity made no pretense at humanity. Standing nearly 12 feet tall, its body was a grotesque amalgamation of stone, metal, and what appeared to be living tissue. Black markings, similar to those on the villagers, covered its surface, pulsing with unnatural energy. Its head was featureless except for a vertical slit that might have been a mouth, and where arms should have been. It sported multiple limbs of varying lengths and configurations. What the hell is that? Tenten breathed, already reaching for one of her more powerful weapon scrolls. A guardian, came Akari's voice from behind them. She had followed at a leisurely pace, flanked by more blank-eyed villagers. One of my master's more direct creations. Not as subtle as our human vessels, but effective for dealing with troublesome shinobi. The guardian let out a roar that shook the ground beneath their feet, the vertical slit on its face opening to reveal rows of crystalline teeth that gleamed like sharpened gems. Split up, Naruto commanded. Hinata, Tenten, engage the guardian but keep your distance. Ino, see if you can get into one of the villagers' minds, find out if they're still in there somewhere. His teammates responded instantly, moving into position with practiced efficiency. Naruto himself faced Akari, the god-killer energy now actively flowing through his new chakra pathways, causing the markings on his skin to glow visibly through his clothing. You're making a mistake, he told the possessed elder. Whatever these gods promised you, it's not worth the lives of innocent people. Akari's smile never faltered. You speak as if I were a separate entity, corrupted by promises of power. I am merely an extension of my master's will, a fragment of divinity given form through this convenient vessel. As she spoke, her appearance began to change. The elderly woman's features remained, but overlaid upon them was something else, a shifting, ethereal visage that reminded Naruto of entities he'd glimpsed through the tear in reality at Shimizu. You see now, she said, her voice fully transformed into the discordant tones of the divine servants. This vessel is merely a vehicle. The true power comes from beyond. Behind Naruto, the battle had been joined. Tenten unleashed a barrage of sealed weapons at the guardian, each impact triggering explosive tags or releasing binding chains. Hinata danced around its massive limbs, her gentle fist striking at junctures where the creature's strange energy flowed most strongly. Ino had managed to get behind a villager, her hands forming the familiar seal of her clan's mind transfer jutsu. Naruto kept his focus on Akari, knowing she was the true threat. If you're so connected to your masters, he challenged, then you know what happened to their servants in Shimizu. You know what this bloodline can do. He raised his hand, allowing the golden red energy to manifest visibly around it, forming a swirling aura reminiscent of his Rasengan but fundamentally different, purer, more focused. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Akari's transformed features. The bloodline has awakened further than anticipated, she acknowledged. But it remains incomplete. You are a pale shadow of the true god killers, vessel. Maybe, Naruto agreed, but I'm learning fast. He lunged forward, the god killer energy extending from his hand like a blade of pure light. Akari moved with inhuman speed, her body bending at impossible angles to avoid the strike. Where his energy passed, the air itself seemed to ripple, as if reality were momentarily disrupted by the contact of divine and anti-divine forces. Akari counterattacked, her hands forming seals unlike any Naruto had seen before. The ground beneath him shifted, stone tentacles erupting upward to ensnare his legs. The divine energy behind the technique was palpable, not chakra as shinobi understood it, but something older and wilder. Naruto channeled the god killer energy downward, and where it touched the stone tentacles, they simply unraveled, the divine power animating them nullified by his bloodline's counter energy. Impressive, Akari conceded, already preparing another technique. The vessel adapts quickly, but adaptation requires energy, and energy can be depleted. A wave of dark energy burst from her outstretched hands, sweeping toward Naruto like a physical manifestation of shadow. He crossed his arms before him, the god killer energy forming an instinctive shield. The two forces collided with a sound like thunder, sending both combatants skidding backward. Behind him, Naruto heard Ino cry out. He risked a glance back and saw her crumpled on the ground, blood trickling from her nose, her face contorted in pain. Ino, Tenten called, entirely distracted from her battle with the Guardian. The creature took advantage, one of its massive limbs sweeping toward her with devastating force. Hinata intercepted, her protective 8 trigram. S64 palms creating a shield of chakra that deflected the blow. Keep focused, she shouted to Tenten. Ino needs us to finish this quickly. Naruto turned back to Akari, fury building within him. What did you do to her? The possessed elder smiled cruelly. Your friend attempted to enter a vessel's mind. But these minds belong to my master now. The backlash of touching divine consciousness is unpleasant for mortals. Naruto felt the god killer energy responding to his anger, surging through his pathways with increasing intensity. The golden red markings spread further across his skin, no longer confined to his arms but extending up his neck and across his chest. You're not gods, he growled, the energy beginning to form a visible aura around his entire body. Whatever you are, whatever realm you come from, you're just parasites, feeding on people who can't fight back. Akari's expression darkened. Blasphemy, she hissed. The divine order maintained the balance of reality. For eons before your kind evolved beyond simple beasts. It was the god killers who disrupted that balance, who dared to elevate mortals above their station. If that's what they did, Naruto replied. The god killer energy now fully manifest around him like a second skin of golden red light, then I'm proud to carry their bloodline. He charged forward, moving with speed that surprised even him. The energy responded to his intent, enhancing his physical abilities beyond normal limits. Akari barely had time to raise a defense before Naruto's fist connected with her midsection, the god killer energy surging forward on impact. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Where the energy touched, the divine overlay on Akari's form began to dissolve, like ink washing away in water. She screamed, a sound that contained both the elderly woman's voice and the discordant tones of the entity possessing her. You cannot banish divinity, she shrieked, her form flickering between human and something else. We are eternal, we are everywhere, not in her, you're not, Naruto countered, pressing his advantage. He placed his palm against Akari's forehead, channeling the god killer energy with precise control. Get out. The golden red light spread from his hand across Akari's face, following the black markings that indicated the divine possession. Where the energies met, the black marks sizzled and evaporated, leaving unblemished human skin behind. With a final, unearthly shriek, the divine presence was expelled from Akari's body. It manifested briefly as a swirling cloud of dark energy abo. Veer before dissipating into the air like smoke caught in a strong wind. The elderly woman collapsed, her body suddenly free of the force that had been animating it. Naruto caught her before she hit the ground, gently lowering her to a sitting position against a nearby wall. What happened? She gasped, her eyes clear and confused as she looked up at Naruto. Who are you? Where is everyone? It's okay, Naruto assured her, though he wasn't entirely certain that was true. You were being controlled, but you're free now. Just rest here for a moment. Around them, the possessed villagers had frozen in place when Akari was freed, as if the controlling force had lost its focus. But the Guardian was still very much active, its massive form continuing its assault on Hinata and Tenten with undiminished ferocity. Naruto turned his attention to the battle, the god-killer energy still flowing strongly through him. Now that he'd succeeded in freeing one person from divine control, he had a better understanding of how to direct the energy, how to make it counteract the divine forces rather than simply destroy them. Tenten, Hinata, he called, moving toward them. I know how to stop it. I need to get close enough to touch it directly. Tenten nodded, immediately adjusting her strategy. She unrolled a new scroll, summoning a chain sickle that she used to ensnare one of the Guardian's limbs. Now, Hinata, she shouted, using her considerable strength to temporarily immobilize the creature. Hinata moved with perfect synchronization, her gentle fist striking a precise sequence of points along the Guardian's stone and flesh body. Though not chakra points in the traditional sense, they were junctions where the divine energy flowed most strongly, and her strikes disrupted the patterns momentarily. Naruto, she called, creating an opening in the Guardian's defenses. Quickly, Naruto leapt forward, channeling the god-killer energy into his palm just as he had with Akari. The Guardian sensed the approaching threat, its featureless head turning toward him with uncanny precision. It roared, the sound vibrating through Naruto's bones, and brought all its limbs to bear in a desperate attempt to stop him. But Tenten and Hinata were there, intercepting each strike, creating the space Naruto needed. He lunged past a massive stone arm, ducked under a whipping tendril of metal, and slammed his glowing palm directly into the center of the Guardian's chest where a core of pulsing dark energy was visible beneath its composite skin. The effect was instantaneous. The god-killer RGY surged from Naruto into the Guardian, spreading through its body like golden red lightning. The creature went rigid, its roar changing from rage to something that might have been pain or fear. The black markings covering its form began to burn away, leaving only inert stone and metal behind. For a moment, the Guardian remained standing, its form still impressive even without the animating divine energy. Then, like a puppet with cut strings, it collapsed into a heap of lifeless materials, just rock and metal that had been temporarily shaped by an otherworldly force. Naruto stood over the remains, breathing heavily as the god-killer energy gradually receded, returning beneath his skin until only the faint markings remained. He felt drained but exhilarated, finally beginning to understand the power he carried. Ino, Hinata said urgently, reminding them of their injured teammate. They rushed to where Ino lay, still unconscious but breathing steadily. Hinata examined her with the Byakugan. Her chakra network is stressed but intact, she reported with evident relief. I think she'll be okay with rest. Whatever happened when she tried to enter that villager's mind, it overwhelmed her temporarily. Around them, the possessed villagers were beginning to collapse one by one, the divine influence that had controlled them apparently withdrawing after the defeat of its main conduit and guardian. Some fell unconscious like Akari, while others remained awake but disoriented, looking around in confusion as if waking from a vivid dream. We need to help these people, Naruto said, looking at the dozens of villagers who had been freed from divine control. And secure the area in case there are more of those guardian things or other divine servants nearby. Tenten nodded, already scanning their surroundings for potential threats. I'll set up a perimeter with my sealed weapons. They should alert us if anything approaches. I'll check the villagers, Hinata offered. My Byakugan can confirm if the divine energy is completely gone from their systems. Naruto knelt beside Ino, gently lifting her into a more comfortable position. And I'll take care of Ino. Once she's stable, we can figure out what happened here and how to prevent it from happening elsewhere. As his teammates moved to their tasks, Naruto found himself reflecting on what he'd learned. The God Killer energy responded to his will, his intent. It wasn't wild and destructive like the Nine Tails power had been when he first accessed it. Instead, it felt cooperative, as if it had been waiting for him to understand how to direct it properly. "You're figuring it out," came Kurama's voice from within his consciousness. "Faster than I expected. You're awake," Naruto replied mentally. "I was starting to wonder if this new power had put you to sleep." The Nine Tails rumbled, a sound that might have been amusement. "I've been observing this energy. It's familiar somehow. Not from my own memories, but from something deeper. Something inherited from the Sage of Six Paths himself." That was interesting. The sage had lived centuries ago, yet even he had apparently encountered something related to the God Killers or the divine entities they opposed. "Any insights to share?" Naruto prodded mentally when Kurama fell silent. The Nine Tails seemed to be sifting through ancient memories. "Only fragments. The sage spoke of realms beyond our own, of beings that existed before chakra as we understand it. He called them the primordials." "Primordials," Naruto repeated silently. "Like these gods that the masked figures in Akari serve." "Perhaps," Kurama conceded. "But the sage also spoke of those who stood against them, mortal bloodlines that carried energies capable of countering divine influence. He respected them, I think." That aligned with what little Naruto had learned about the God Killers. Not reckless destroyers, but protectors who had defended humanity from entities that saw mortals as nothing more than vessels or resources. Ino stirred in his arms, pulling Naruto from his internal conversation. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition as she focused on his face. "What happened?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "You tried to enter the mind of one of the possessed villagers," Naruto explained gently. "It backfired somehow." Ino winced, raising a hand to her temple. "It was horrible, like trying to enter a room filled with screaming voices, all talking at once." The villager's consciousness was still there, but pushed aside, compressed into a tiny corn. While something else occupied the rest of the space. She struggled to sit up, and Naruto helped her, supporting her back as she oriented herself. "The good news is, we managed to free them," he told her. "I figured out how to use the God Killer energy to cancel out whatever was possessing them." Ino's eyes widened as she looked around, seeing villagers being tended to by Hinata while Tenten secured the perimeter. "All of them. How?" Quote, "The energy responds to intent," Naruto explained, finding it easier to articulate now that he'd experienced it directly. "When I focused on expelling the Nay influence rather than just fighting it, the God Killer power knew exactly what to do. Almost like it was designed specifically for that purpose. Which it probably was," Ino noted, her analytical mind already working despite her fatigue. If the legends are true, the God Killer bloodline evolved as a direct counter to divine entities trying to control or harm humans. She looked more closely at Naruto, her gaze focusing on the faint markings visible on his neck above his collar. "The patterns have spread," she observed. "They're more extensive than before." Naruto nodded, not surprised. He could feel the difference. The God Killer energy had integrated further into his system after being actively channeled against divine entities. "It's responding to use, adapting as I learn." Hinata approached, having completed her examination of the nearest villagers. "They're clear of divine energy," she reported. "But disoriented and weak. Many don't remember anything from the time they were possessed." "How long do you think they were under control?" Naruto asked. Hinata glanced back at the villagers she'd examined. "Based on what some of them are saying, at least 2 weeks. Apparently, it started with the arrival of a traveling spiritual teacher, likely Akari or whoever was possessing her initially." 2 weeks, Ino repeated grimly. "That's a lot more sustainable than what happened in Shimizu. Instead of just draining people dry, they found a way to use them long-term." The implications were disturbing. If divine entities could possess humans without immediately killing them, the Y could potentially infiltrate anywhere, even hidden villages like Konoha. Tenten rejoined them, her perimeter security apparently established to her satisfaction. "No signs of other guardians or divine servants in the immediate area," she reported. "But I found something interesting on the eastern edge of the village." She held out her hand, revealing a small stone tablet no larger than her palm. Inscribed upon it were symbols similar to those Naruto had seen in Shimizu and on Akari's pendant. There are 7 of these placed around the village perimeter, Tenten explained. They form a perfect circle. Some kind of boundary or containment system, I think. Naruto took the tablet, feeling the god killer energy stir in response to the divine script it bore. A ritual circle, he guessed. Epping the possessed villagers in and maybe keeping others out until they were ready to expand their influence. That fits with what I saw in their chakra networks, Hinata added. The divine energy wasn't just controlling them, it was gradually changing them, making them more suitable as long-term vessels. Ino, now steady enough to stand with Naruto's support, looked troubled. If they've developed this method, they could be doing the same thing in other settlements. Creating footholds across the shinobi world. Preparing for something bigger, Naruto concluded. The pieces were falling into place. Shimizu had been a test run. A quick resource-gathering operation. This village represented a more sophisticated approach, one focused on establishing a stable presence in their world. We need to report back to Lady Tsunade, Tenten said, and figure out how to identify other locations that might be compromised. Naruto nodded, but his attention had shifted to the elderly woman, Akari, who was now sitting up and speaking with some of the other villagers. He helped Ino to a comfortable seat and then approached the former vessel of divine will. How are you feeling? He asked, kneeling beside her. Akari looked up, her eyes clear but haunted. Like I've been a prisoner in my own body, she said, her voice frail but steady. I could see everything, hear everything, but couldn't stop any of it. Do you remember what it wanted? The thing that was controlling you? She nodded slowly. It called itself a herald of the divine order. It was preparing this place. Preparing us. A shudder ran through her thin frame. It said we would become worthy vessels for the ascension. That our world had been chosen as the new domain of the primordials. That word again. The same term Kurama had recalled from the sage's teachings. Primordials, Naruto repeated. The beings that the divine order serves. No, Akari corrected, her eyes distant as she recalled the alien memories. The divine order doesn't serve the primordials. They are the primordials, or rather, their collective will. A hierarchy of divine beings who believe reality should be ordered according to their design. And what place do humans have in this design? Naruto asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Vessels, Akari whispered, nothing more. Containers to be filled with divine essence once properly prepared. Her gaze sharpened as she focused on Naruto more intently. But it feared you, or rather, what you carry. The bloodline that once drove the divine order from our realm. The god killers, Naruto confirmed. Akari nodded. The herald's memories were fragmented, but I gleaned impressions. Long ago, the divine order attempted to claim our world, but the god killers rose up and drove them back. Sealing the gateways between realms. But now they're finding ways back through, Naruto said. Using people like you as conduits. Yes, and the Herald was specifically tasked with finding eliminating the last carrier of the God-Killer bloodline. She reached out a trembling hand, brushing her fingers against Naruto's sleeve where the markings lay beneath. Though I don't think it expected you to be so potent. That aligned with what the masked figures in Konoha had said. That they had come for Naruto specifically, to prevent the bloodline from awakening. But they had been too late. Did it know of any others? He asked. Other god-killer descendants who might have survived. Akari shook her head. If it did, that knowledge wasn't accessible to me. But it was, surprised when it sensed your power. As if it had expected any remaining bloodline to be far more diluted. That was both disappointing and concerning. Naruto had hoped there might be others out there with the same abilities, people who might understand what he was experiencing and help him master it. But if his bloodline was unexpectedly strong, it might also make him an even greater target for the divine order. One more thing, Akari said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. The herald spoke of a sanctuary, a place where the last god killers hid their most powerful artifacts and knowledge before they were hunted to extinction. It called it the Godfall Temple. Naruto's pulse quickened. Did it know where this temple is? Not precisely, but it believed the temple lay somewhere in the lands now called the Valley of the End. The Valley of the End, the historic site where Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha had their final battle, where massive statues commemorated their legendary confrontation. If the Godfall Temple was hidden somewhere in that region, it had remained undiscovered for generations despite the area's significance to the shinobi world. "Thank you," Naruto told Akari sincerely. "This information could help us stop the Divine Order before they hurt more people." The elderly woman nodded wearily. "Be careful, young man. The Herald's memories were filled with hatred for your kind, not just humans. But specifically the God-Killer bloodline. They will not rest until you are eliminated." Naruto rejoined his teammates, sharing what he'd learned from Akari. Their expressions grew increasingly serious as he described the Divine Order's plans and the possible location of the Godfall Temple. "The Valley of the End," Hinata mused. "It's not far from here, perhaps a day's journey to the northeast. But it's also a massive area with complex terrain," Tenten pointed out. "Finding a hidden temple there could take weeks without more specific directions." Ino, who had recovered enough to stand unassisted, looked thoughtful. "Unless the God-Killer bloodline itself could lead the way. These abilities seem to have an instinctive component. They know how to counter divine energy. Without you having to figure out the mechanics. Maybe they would recognize the temple as well." It was a reasonable theory. The God-Killer energy had responded to threats and opportunities so far, Gu. Eyeing Naruto's actions in subtle ways even before he fully understood what was happening. "We need to make a decision," he said, looking at each of his teammates in turn. "Our mission was to investigate the disturbances here and report back to Konoha. But now we have information about a potential resource that could help us understand and counter the Divine Order. Lady Tsunade should be informed," Hinata said pragmatically. "But time could be critical. If the Divine Order learns what Akari told you, they might move to secure or destroy the temple before we can reach it." "Split up," Tenten suggested. "Two of us return to Konoha with the information and the freed villagers, to investigate the Valley of the End." Naruto considered this option. Normally, dividing their already small team would be tactically unsound, especially when facing an enemy of unknown capabilities. But the situation demanded both swift action and proper reporting to Konoha. "I need to go to the valley," he said finally. "If the temple responds to the God-Killer bloodline, I have to be there." "I'll go with you," Hinata said immediately. "My Byakugan could help locate hidden structures, and I can monitor how the temple affects your chakra network if we find it." Naruto nodded gratefully. He'd been about to suggest the same pairing, knowing that Hinata's abilities complemented his own in this situation. "Then Ino and I will head back to Konoha." Tenten agreed. "We can escort any villagers who need medical attention and brief Lady Tsunade on what's happened here. And request backup," Ino added. "Depending on what you find at the valley. You might need additional support quickly." With their plan decided, they spent the next few hours organizing the village's recovery. Most residents were stable out to remain and rebuild their community, but a few, including Akari, needed more extensive medical care than could be provided locally. These would travel to Konoha with Tenten and Ino. As sunset approached, the four shinobi gathered at the village's northern edge to finalize their preparations before separating. "Be careful," Ino told Naruto and Hinata seriously. "We still don't fully understand what you're dealing with, Naruto. These divine entities clearly have abilities beyond normal shinobi techniques. And we don't know what you'll find at this temple," Tenten added. "Even if it was created by the God Killers. Ancient security systems can be unpredictable." Naruto nodded, appreciating their concern. "We'll proceed with caution, and we'll send word as soon as we find anything significant." Hinata had prepared travel packs for their journey, redistributing supplies from their original mission load. "We should reach the valley by midday tomorrow if we maintain a steady pace," she said. Though finding the temple itself might take longer. With final exchanges of information and well wishes, the team separated. Tenten and Ino headed south with their small group of patients, while Naruto and Hinata turned northeast toward the historic Valley of the End. They traveled in comfortable silence as twilight deepened around them, moving at a sustainable pace that would allow them to cover significant ground before needing to rest. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they left the river valley behind, climbing into the foothills that eventually led to the mountainous region surrounding their destination. As night fell completely, they found a sheltered clearing to make camp. Hinata efficiently set up a small, concealed fire while Naruto secured the perimeter, both of him falling into the familiar routines of shinobi on a field mission. "How are you feeling?" Hinata asked as they sat beside the fire, sharing a simple meal of travel rations. "The energy you channeled today was intense." Naruto considered the question, taking stock of his body and the god-killer energy that now flowed alongside his normal chakra. "Different," he said finally. "More in control, I think. Each time I use it, I understand it better." Hinata nodded, her pale eyes reflecting the firelight. "I can see the changes with my Byakugan. The new pathways are stabilizing, integrating with your original chakra network rather than competing with it." "And Kurama's chakra?" Naruto asked, curious about her perspective on the interaction between the Nine Tails power and his awakening bloodline. "That's the most fascinating part," Hinata said, leaning forward slightly. "The Nine Tails chakra seems to be adapting to accommodate the god-killer energy. Almost as if it recognizes it on some fundamental level. That aligned with what Kurama had told him about the Sage of Six Paths having knowledge of the primordials and those who opposed them. Perhaps that connection ran deeper than even the Nine Tails realized." "Kurama mentioned something earlier," Naruto said, poking at the fire with a stick. "About the sage knowing of beings called primordials, which is the same term Akari used to describe the divine order." Hinata's expression grew thoughtful. "The Hyuga clan preserves some very old records," she said. "Histories that predate the hidden villages. I remember reading mentions of those who came before, and entities from beyond the veil. They were always described as threats that were eventually sealed away by the god-killers, maybe," Naruto suggested. "Possibly." Hinata hesitated, then added, "There was one scroll that mentioned the golden red flame that burns away false divinity. I never understood what it meant until I saw your energy manifest in Shimizu." Naruto absorbed this, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. The god-killers hadn't been forgotten entirely. Their legacy remained in fragments of lore preserved by clans like the Hyuga and the stories passed down through generations. "Do you think?" Hinata began, then paused as if uncertain whether to continue. "What is it?" Naruto prompted gently. "Do you think this is why Konoha's enemies have always seemed particularly focused on you? Beyond being the Nine Tails Jinchuriki, I mean. Perhaps they sensed, even unconsciously, that you carried something else. Something potentially more disruptive to their plans." It was an interesting theory. Naruto had always attributed the attention he received from organizations like the Akatsuki to his status as a Jinchuriki. But if the god-killer bloodline had been dormant within him all along, perhaps it had influenced events in ways neither he nor his enemies fully understood. "Maybe," he acknowledged, "though I think Kurama was probably the main attraction. Still, it's strange to think I've been carrying this bloodline my whole life without knowing it." Hinata smiled softly. "Not so strange. You've always had a way of affecting those around you, Naruto. Of challenging systems and beliefs that others accepted without question. Perhaps that was the god-killer heritage expressing itself in a different way." Her observation struck a chord. Naruto had indeed spent much of his life challenging established orders, from the villagers' perception of him as a dangerous outcast to Neji's fatalistic view of destiny to Pain's cycle of vengeance. He'd never attributed this to anything but his own stubborn nature, but maybe there was more to it. "Get some rest," Hinata suggested, noting his thoughtful expression. "I'll take first watch. We should reach the valley by midday tomorrow, and we'll need our strength for whatever awaits us there." Naruto nodded, settling into his bedroll while Hinata moved to a position where she could monitor their surroundings. As he drifted toward sleep, the god-killer energy pulsed gently beneath his skin, like a compass needle aligning itself toward their destination. Whatever the Godfall Temple held, knowledge, power, or simply answers about his newly awakened heritage, Naruto sensed it would change everything. The Valley of the End lived up to its name. As Naruto and Hinata approached its edge shortly after midday, they were greeted by the sight of a massive geological scar cutting through the landscape. Sheer cliffs dropped hundreds of feet to the river below, which wound its way through the gorge like a silver thread. At the valley's widest point stood the colossal statues of Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha, eternal stone sentinels overlooking the site of their historic final battle. "It's even more impressive than I remembered," Naruto murmured, having last seen the valley during his fateful confrontation with Sasuke years earlier. Hinata activated her Byakugan, scanning the vast area. There are numerous cave systems throughout the cliffs, she reported. Natural formations mostly, but some show signs of having been expanded or modified. Can you see anything that looks like a temple? Or structures with markings similar to those in Shimizu? She concentrated, extending her visual range to its limits. Nothing obvious. But there's something strange about the waterfall between the statues. The chakra flow there doesn't match natural patterns. They made their way carefully down the cliff face, using chakra control to adhere to the steep stone. As they descended, Naruto felt the god-killer energy stirring more actively within him, responding to something in their surroundings. It wasn't quite a directional pull, more a general sense of awakening, a slumbering animal catching a familiar scent. When they reached the base of the cliff, near where the river widened into a pool beneath the massive waterfall, Naruto placed his palm against the damp stone. The faint markings on his skin pulsed once, brightening momentarily before settling again. "It's here," he said with certainty. "Somewhere near the waterfall, just like you sensed." Hinata nodded, continuing to scan with her Byakugan. "There's a disruption in the chakra flow behind the waterfall itself. It could be a concealment technique, something designed to hide an entrance." They approached the thundering cascade, feeling the spray on their faces as they drew closer. The roar of falling water made conversation difficult, forcing them to rely on hand signals and their years of training together to coordinate their movements. Naruto reached the edge of the pool, the water lapping at his sandals. The god-killer energy was definitely responding now, the markings on his skin glowing visibly even in the daylight. He reached out toward the waterfall, not touching it yet, but feeling the energy extend from his fingertips like invisible tendrils searching for something. And then he felt it, a response from within or behind the waterfall, a pulse of energy that matched the rhythm of his own. The water before him shimmered, and for a brief moment, Naruto glimpsed something beyond, not the expected rock face, but an opening, a passage leading deeper. "There," he shouted over the roar, pointing. "Did you see it?" Hinata nodded, her Byakugan focused intently on the spot. "The concealment is failing. It responds to your bloodline." Naruto stepped forward into the pool, the water rising to his knees, then his waist as he approached the waterfall. The god-killer energy formed a visible aura around him now, the golden red light pulsing in time with his heartbeat. He raised both hands toward the thundering water, instinctively channeling the energy outward. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The waterfall before him didn't stop flowing, but it parted, the water diverting around an invisible barrier to reveal a tunnel carved into the cliff face. Ancient symbols lined the entrance, identical to those that had appeared on Naruto's skin when the god-killer bloodline first awakened. "The Godfall Temple," Naruto breathed, the words nearly lost in the roar of the diverted water. Hinata joined him, her eyes wide as she took in the revealed entrance. "The concealment was incredible," she said. "Even with my Byakugan, I could only sense disturbances, not see the actual passage." They exchanged a look, silently acknowledging both the opportunity and the potential danger that lay before them. Then, with Naruto's god-killer energy maintaining the opening in the waterfall, they stepped through into the hidden tunnel beyond. The passage was surprisingly dry, sloping gently upward into the cliff. The walls were smooth, clearly carved with precision rather than naturally formed, and at regular intervals. Recesses held what appeared to be crystalline structures that emitted a soft, ambient light. "These are old," Hinata observed, examining one of the crystals with her Byakugan. "Very old, but they're still generating energy after all this time." As they ventured deeper, the tunnel widened into a proper corridor, the ceiling rising until it was well above their heads. The simple carved walls gave way to polished stone inlaid with metallic veins that caught and reflected the light from the crystals. And everywhere, the same symbols that marked Naruto's skin appeared, carved into doorframes, etched onto floor tiles, inscribed in flowing patterns along the walls. "Can you read any of this?" Hinata asked, trailing her fingers over a particularly elaborate inscription. Naruto shook his head. "Not exactly, but I feel it, somehow. Like it's speaking directly to the energy inside me." They continued forward, the corridor eventually opening into a vast circular chamber that took their breath away. The ceiling soared at least 50 feet above them, forming a perfect dome inscribed with what appeared to be a map of stars and constellations unfamiliar to either shinobi. The floor was a mosaic of colored stone depicting scenes of battle, human figures wreathed in golden red energy facing towering entities of shifting, abstract form. But it was what stood at the center of the chamber that drew their attention most forcefully. A raised dais supported a stone altar, and hovering above it was a sphere of pure energy, not quite solid, not quite liquid, but something in between. Golden red light pulsed within it, identical to the energy that now flowed through Naruto's veins. "What is it?" Hinata whispered, her Byakugan active as she studied the phenomenon. "I think." Naruto approached slowly, feeling the god-killer energy responding to the sphere's presence. "It's some kind of record. Or maybe a reservoir." As he drew closer, images began to form within the sphere, flickering scenes that changed too quickly to fully comprehend. Figures wrapped in golden red energy facing creatures of impossible geometry. Cities both familiar and alien. Battles that reshaped landscapes. And throughout it all, the same symbols that marked the god-killer bloodline. It's their history, Naruto realized, now standing directly before the altar. The god-killers recorded their knowledge, their experiences, their power, and left it here for whoever came after. Instinctively, he reached toward the sphere. The markings on his skin flared brightly in response, and the sphere itself pulsed in the same rhythm. "Naruto, wait," Hinata cautioned, moving to his side. "We don't know what will happen if you touch it." He paused, acknowledging the wisdom in her words. But the god-killer energy was practically pulling him toward the sphere now, as if recognizing a missing piece of itself. I think this is what I've been looking for," he said. "Not just answers about this bloodline, but a way to understand it, to control it properly." Hinata studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "Just be careful. I'll monitor what happens with my Byakugan and pull you back if anything seems wrong." Grateful for her support, Naruto turned back to the sphere and slowly, deliberately extended his hand until his fingertips brushed its surface. The contact was like touching lightning. Energy surged up his arm and throughout his body in an instant, the god-killer markings flaring so brightly that Hinata had to shield her eyes. The sphere itself seemed to liquefy, flowing up and around Naruto's arm like sentient water, enveloping him in a cocoon of golden red light. Inside that cocoon, Naruto experienced a flood of images and sensations, not random this time, but ordered, deliberate. He saw the origins of the god-killer bloodline, born from humanity's desperate need to defend itself against the primordials who had once ruled their realm. He witnessed the centuries-long conflict between the divine order and those who carried the counter-energy capable of disrupting divine will. And he learned the truth that had been hidden for generations. The god-killers hadn't sought to destroy divinity out of hatred or ambition, but to preserve the free will of mortals against beings that would have made them nothing more than vessels for otherworldly consciousness. The knowledge transferred itself directly into his mind, bypassing language entirely, pure understanding flowing from the ancient repository into the last active carrier of the bloodline it had been created to preserve. Outside the cocoon, Hinata watched in awe and concern as Naruto remained suspended in the golden red energy, his feet barely touching the ground. Her Byakugan led the extraordinary changes taking place within his chakra network, the god-killer pathways expanding, strengthening, integrating more completely with his natural system while maintaining perfect harmony with the nine tails' separate energy. After what felt like hours but might have been only minutes, the sphere's energy began to recede, flowing back toward the altar but leaving traces of itself within Naruto's system. As the last of it separated from him, he staggered slightly, and Hinata moved quickly to support him. "Naruto, are you all right?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. He turned to her, and she gasped softly. His eyes, normally bright blue, now held flecks of golden red that swirled like stars in a night sky. But it was the expression on his face that truly caught her attention, a mixture of wonder, resolution, and profound understanding. "I know now," he said, his voice steady despite the overwhelming experience he'd just undergone. "I know what the god-killers were, what they fought for, and what I need to do." Before Hinata could ask for clarification, a sound echoed through the chamber, footsteps approaching from the corridor they had used to enter. Both shinobi tensed, turning toward the sound with weapons ready. A figure appeared in the entrance to the chamber, tall and graceful, dressed in travel-worn clothes that had once been fine. Long black hair framed a face of striking beauty, with eyes that seemed to shift color in the crystalline light. But most notable was the familiar glint of golden-red energy that occasionally flickered beneath her skin, faint but unmistakable to Naruto's newly enhanced perception. "So," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber, "another Uzumaki finds the Godfall Temple. I was beginning to think I was the last one left." Naruto stared at her, recognition and confusion warring within him. The sphere had shown him many faces, many carriers of the bloodline throughout history. But this woman hadn't been among them. "Who are you?" he demanded, the god-killer energy humming beneath his skin in response to her presence. She smiled, an expression both warm and predatory. "My name is Tsubaki Yuru. Or it is now, at least. Names change when you live as long as I have." She approached, her movements fluid and confident. "But more importantly, I'm like you, a carrier of the divine hunt." "A god-killer? That's impossible," Naruto said, though the evidence of his own senses contradicted his words. "The Divine Order believes I'm the last one." Tsubaki laughed, the sound echoing through the chamber. "The Divine Order sees what it expects to see. I've spent centuries learning to hide my nature from their servants and scouts. A necessary precaution when you're being hunted by entities that can possess any human they encounter." She stopped a few paces away, studying Naruto with open curiosity. "But you're different. Your bloodline is strong, purer than any I've seen in generations. And you've bonded with the repository." She gestured to the now dormant sphere above the altar. "That makes you very interesting indeed." Hinata moved slightly closer to Naruto, her posture protective despite the fact that they were facing someone who might be an ally rather than a threat. "If you're truly a god-killer," she said, her voice polite but firm, "then you know what's happening. The Divine Order is returning. They've already established footholds in at least 2 locations we know of." Tsubaki's expression darkened. "Yes, I've been tracking their movements for months. Their activity has increased dramatically, far beyond the occasional incursion I've grown accustomed to countering." Her gaze returned to Naruto. "And now I understand why. They've sensed you, the awakening of a bloodline powerful enough to truly threaten them." "The repository showed me their history," Naruto said. "The god-killers fought the Divine Order to protect humanity's free will, to prevent them from using mortals as mere vessels." "That's the simplified version," Tsubaki agreed. "The fuller truth is more complex. The primordials, the entities that compose the Divine Order, once ruled this realm completely. Humans were their creation, their experiment. The god-killers arose not as a separate species, but as humans who developed resistance to divine control, who found a way to channel energy that could disrupt divine will." She circled the altar, trailing her fingers along its edge. "For millennia, the conflict continued. The Divine Order sought to maintain control, the god-killers fought for independence. Eventually, the god-killers succeeded in driving the primordials back and sealing the gateways between realms. But the seals are failing," Hinata observed. "The Divine Order is finding ways to return. Yes, the seals were always imperfect, designed to weaken over vast periods of time. The god-killers believed that humanity would have evolved beyond the need for protection by the time the Divine Order could return in force." "They were wrong," Naruto said grimly. Tsubaki inclined her head. "Perhaps. Or perhaps they simply underestimated the Divine Order's patience. Entities that exist beyond conventional time can afford to wait centuries for the perfect moment to strike." She fixed Naruto with an intense gaze. "And now they perceive that moment has come. Your bloodline has awakened, but you're still learning to control it. The 9 tails within you adds a complication they've never encountered before. You represent both their greatest threat and their greatest opportunity." "Opportunity?" Hinata questioned, a note of alarm in her voice. "If they could capture and convert a vessel with both the god-killer bloodline and a tailed beast's power." Tsubaki let the implication hang in the air. "They'd have a weapon against any remaining resistance," Naruto finished, understanding dawning. "That's why they tried to kill me in Konoha before my bloodline fully awakened. Once it manifested, capturing me became more valuable than eliminating me." Tsubaki nodded. "Exactly. Which makes your next moves critically important." She turned to include Hinata in her gaze. "Both of you. The Divine Order will be consolidating its footholds, preparing for a larger incursion. We need to disrupt their plans before they can bring more powerful entities through the weakened gateways. Naruto questioned. A smile touched Tsubaki's lips. Did you think I would let another god killer face this alone? Especially one with such potential. She extended her hand, golden red energy flickering briefly between her fingers. I've spent centuries fighting skirmishes against divine servants. But with your power added to mine, we might actually stand a chance of driving them back completely. Naruto exchanged a glance with Hinata, seeing his own cautious hope reflected in her eyes. If Tsubaki was telling the truth, if she really was another god killer who had been fighting the Divine Order or centuries, then her knowledge and experience could be invaluable. But trust didn't come easily to shinobi trained to look beneath the beneath. And something about Tsubaki's story felt incomplete, as if she were sharing selected truths rather than the whole picture. We need to return to Konoha first, Naruto said firmly. Report what we've found and coordinate with the Hokage. If the Divine Order is targeting multiple locations, we'll need the support of the allied shinobi forces. A flash of impatience crossed Tsubaki's face before her features smoothed into understanding. Of course, your loyalty to your village is commendable. She inclined her head slightly. Though I would caution against spreading knowledge of the god-killer bloodline too widely. The Divine Order has eyes and ears in unexpected places. Lady Tsunade can be trusted, Hinata said, her quiet voice carrying conviction. And we'll need resources that only Konoha can provide if we're going to locate and counter these divine incursions effectively. Tsubaki considered this, then nodded. Very well, I'll accompany you to Konoha. Perhaps seeing another god killer will help convince your leaders of the seriousness of the situation. As they prepared to leave the temple, Naruto took one last look at the repository, the sphere of knowledge and power that had transferred centuries of god killer heritage directly into his mind. It was dormant now, having fulfilled its purpose, but he sensed it wasn't empty. There were deeper layers of information, techniques, and history that he hadn't yet accessed, perhaps because he wasn't ready for them. It will be here when you return, Tsubaki said, noting his gaze. The Godfall Temple has remained hidden for centuries. It can wait a little longer. They retraced their steps through the corridor, Naruto's enhanced god-killer energy maintaining the opening in the waterfall as they passed through. Once outside, in the late afternoon light that filtered down into the Valley of the End, Tsubaki looked up at the massive statues of Hashirama and Madara with a bemused expression. How fitting, she murmured. The god-killer's greatest sanctuary hidden beneath monuments to a more recent conflict. History builds upon itself in such interesting ways. As they began the climb back up to the valley rim, Hinata activated her Byakugan to scan their surroundings. Her sudden intake of breath caused both Naruto and Tsubaki to tense. What is it? Naruto asked, instantly alert. Movement, Hinata replied, her voice low and urgent. Approximately 1 kilometer northeast. 7 figures approaching rapidly. Their chakra signatures are wrong. Distorted, like the possessed villagers but more intense. Tsubaki's expression hardened. Divine servants. More sophisticated than the masked figures you encountered before, I'd wager. They must have sensed the activation of the repository. Naruto felt the god-killer energy respond to the threat, flowing more readily through his enhanced pathways. After bonding with the repository, he found he could direct it with far greater precision, almost as an extension of his will rather than a separate force. Options? He asked, looking between Hinata and Tsubaki. We could try to evade them, Hinata suggested, still tracking the approaching figures. Circle around to the southwest, use the forest cover to break line of sight. They'll still sense the god-killer energy, Tsubaki countered. Especially now that yours is so active, Naruto. Evasion might delay but won't prevent confrontation. Then we face them, Naruto decided. On ground of our choosing, not theirs. Tsubaki nodded approvingly. The high ground would give us advantage. These servants prefer to overwhelm with numbers rather than skill. They altered their course, climbing toward a rocky outcropping that would provide both visibility and defensive positioning. As they reached the formation, Hinata continued to monitor the approaching threat. They've changed course to intercept, she reported. They know exactly where we are. As expected, Tsubaki said grimly. She rolled up her sleeves, revealing arms covered in faint markings similar to Naruto's but more elaborate, suggesting centuries of development and refinement. Remember, these aren't humans, not anymore. They're vessels completely overtaken by divine will. Don't hesitate. Naruto positioned himself at the front of their small formation, with Hinata and Tsubaki flanking him slightly behind. The God Killer energy hummed through his system, ready but controlled, a significant improvement over his previous encounters where the power had responded primarily to emotion rather than intent. The divine servants emerged from the tree line below, moving with the unnatural synchronization Naruto had come to associate with entities of the divine order. But unlike the masked figures from Konoha or the possessed villagers, these beings made no pretense at humanity. Therefore, Ms. were humanoid but wrong, limbs too long, joints bending in impossible directions, skin rippling with the same black markings he had seen before. Most disturbing were their faces, featureless except for vertical slits where eyes should be, glowing with an internal light that pulsed in perfect unison across all 7 figures. Vessel, they spoke in chorus, their voices layered and discordant. You have accessed forbidden knowledge. You have strengthened the abomination within your blood. This cannot be permitted. They certainly talk a lot for supposedly superior beings, Naruto muttered, channeling the God Killer energy into a visible aura around his body. Since bonding with the repository, the golden red light responded more eagerly, forming patterns in the air around him that mirrored the ancient symbols of the temple. Traitor, the servants continued, their attention shifting to Tsubaki. You who have hidden from divine justice for centuries. Your time of reckoning has come. Tsubaki's lips curved in a cold smile. I've heard that before, yet here I stand, while your masters remain trapped beyond the veil. The divine servants began to climb toward their position, moving with disturbing speed despite their awkward proportions. Hinata shifted into her gentle fist stance, chakra visibly gathering around her hands. Now, Naruto said quietly. Tsubaki moved first, her century's of experience evident in the fluid grace of her attack. The God Killer energy manifested around her hands as curved blades of golden red light, and she leapt from the outcropping, slashing through the air in a wide arc. Where the energy passed, reality itself seemed to ripple, and 2 of the servants stumbled as if suddenly disconnected from whatever force controlled them. Hinata followed immediately, her gentle fist enhanced by her perfect chakra control. She struck with precision at the junctions where the black markings clustered most densely on the nearest servant, and to Naruto's amazement, the divine energy responded to her technique, not dispelled completely as it would have been to his God Killer power, but disrupted, confused. Naruto himself focused on the 3 servants approaching from the center. With his newly acquired knowledge, he understood better how to counter their abilities. The God Killer energy responded to his intent, forming not just an aura but specific constructs, shields that deflected the waves of dark energy the servants projected, blades that cut through their divine defenses. But the servants were formidable opponents. Unlike the masked figures in Konoha, these entities seemed to have access to a wider range of divine abilities. One manipulated gravity, causing rocks to rise from the ground and orbit around it before launching toward Naruto like missiles. Another distorted space itself, appearing to be in multiple locations simultaneously, making physical attacks difficult to land. Tsubaki fought with the efficiency of someone who had centuries to perfect her technique. Her God Killer energy manifested differently than Naruto's, more controlled, more precise, forming complex patterns in the air that seemed to lock the divine servants in place before she struck with devastating accuracy. The slit, she called to Naruto as she dispatched another servant. It's their connection to their masters. Sever it with the God Killer energy and they collapse. Naruto adjusted his approach, focusing on the vertical slits that served as the servants' eyes. When he slashed through one with a blade of golden red energy, the effect was immediate, the servant's form went rigid. Then collapsed in on itself, dissolving into the same black mist he had seen in previous encounters. Hinata, though lacking the God Killer bloodline, had found her own effective strategy. Her Byakugan allowed her to see precisely where the divine energy clustered within the servants' forms, and her gentle fist disrupted those concentrations long enough for either Naruto or Tsubaki to deliver a finishing blow. The battle was intense but brief. Within minutes, 6 of the 7 servants had been dispatched, their essence returning to whatever realm they had been drawn from. The last one, apparently recognizing its disadvantage, attempted to retreat, its form blurring as it accelerated down the slope. "Don't let it escape," Tsubaki shouted. "It will report back to its masters." Naruto was already moving, the god killer energy enhancing his speed beyond normal limits. He overtook the fleeing servant at the edge of the tree line, cutting off its escape with a wall of golden red energy that materialized directly in its path. The servant skidded to a halt, its featureless face turning toward Naruto with what might have been hatred if it had been capable of human emotion. "Your interference changes nothing, vessel," it said, its layered voice now speaking alone rather than in chorus with its companions. "The divine order has awakened. The gateways are opening. This world will return to its rightful masters." "I've heard enough from you," Naruto replied, channeling the god killer energy into a concentrated form around his hand. "If your masters want this world, they can come face me themselves." Quote. He struck with precision, driving the golden red energy directly into the vertical slit on the servant's face. There was a sound like glass shattering, and the divine entity dissolved, its form collapsing into mist that dissipated in the afternoon breeze. Hinata and Tsubaki joined him moments later, both showing signs of exertion but no serious injuries. "That was efficient," Tsubaki observed, studying Naruto with renewed interest. "The repository has improved your control significantly." Naruto nodded, feeling the god killer energy settle back beneath his skin. "Ready but no longer actively manifesting. It showed me how to direct the power, how to shape it for specific purposes rather than just letting it respond to threats. Your techniques complement each other well," Tsubaki added, glancing at Hinata. "The gentle fist and the god killer energy. I've never seen divine servants disrupted quite that way before." Hinata accepted the compliment with a graceful nod. Though her attention remained primarily on their surroundings, her Byakugan active and scanning for further threats. "We should move," she advised. "That confrontation was likely visible for some distance. And we don't know if there are more servants in the area." Tsubaki agreed. "Yes, and this attack confirms my suspicions. The Divine Order is monitoring for god killer energy signatures. They must have detection methods we haven't identified yet. All the more reason to reach Konoha quickly," Naruto said. "We need to warn them about what's coming and prepare defenses." They set off at a rapid pace, leaving the valley of the end behind and making for the forests that would provide better cover during their journey. As they traveled, Naruto found himself processing the knowledge gained from the repository while simultaneously assessing their new ally. Tsubaki Yuru was clearly powerful and experienced, her god-killer abilities refined through centuries of conflict with divine servants. But something about her story still troubled him, the gaps she left, the details she glossed over. Why had she remained hidden for so long? Why approach them now, when the divine order was gaining strength? Rather than seeking out other potential allies earlier. "You're wondering about me," Tsubaki said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. They had paused briefly at Estrella to rest and replenish their water supplies, and she had caught Naruto studying her while Hinata scouted ahead. "You've lived for centuries, fighting the divine order alone," Naruto replied. "That raises questions." Tsubaki smiled faintly. "Longevity is one of the less advertised aspects of the god-killer bloodline. The energy sustains us, repairs damage, slows aging. The stronger the bloodline, the more pronounced the effect." She gestured to herself. "I'm over 400 years old, though the past century has begun to take its toll. My bloodline is diluted compared to yours. And in all that time, you never sought allies. Never tried to find others with the same bloodline." A shadow crossed her face. "I did, once. There was a clan in what is now the land of whirlpools, distant relatives of the Uzumaki. Carriers of a weakened version of the bloodline. I spent decades helping them build defenses against divine incursions, teaching them to recognize the signs." "The land of whirlpools," Naruto repeated. "My mother's homeland." Tsubaki nodded. "Yes, the Uzumaki clan's famous sealing techniques weren't developed solely for containing tailed beasts or enhancing weapons. Their origin, purpose was to create barriers against divine influence, to seal gateways between realms. But the land of whirlpools was destroyed," Hinata said, returning from her scouting and joining the conversation. "During the early conflicts between hidden villages. So history records, Tsubaki agreed, her tone bitter. The truth is more complex. Yes, human conflicts played a role, but the Destructio N was orchestrated by agents of the Divine Order who had infiltrated the emerging shinobi power structures. They recognized the threat posed by the Uzumaki's sealing techniques and ensured the clan was scattered or eliminated. This revelation hit Naruto hard. He had always known his mother's homeland had been destroyed, but to learn it had been specifically targeted because of its connection to He God Killer Bloodline added a new dimension to the tragedy. After that, Tsubaki continued, I chose to operate alone. Drawing attention to other bloodline carriers only made them targets. Better let the Divine Order believe the bloodline had been all but extinguished, to fight from the shadows and maintain the seals as best I could without allies. Until now, Naruto said. What changed? Tsubaki met his gaze directly. You did. When your bloodline awakened in Konoha, it created a surge of energy that rippled across the barriers between realms. I felt it immediately, stronger, purer than any god-killer manifestation I'd sensed in centuries. And I knew that hiding was no longer an option. Because the Divine Order sensed it too, Hinata surmised. Exactly. The game changed the moment your power manifested, Naruto. The Divine Order will commit far greater resources to this incursion now that they know a strong god-killer bloodline has reappeared. It was a sobering thought. Naruto's awakening, while giving them a powerful weapon against divine entities, had also accelerated the Divine Order's plans. The responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. We should continue moving, Hinata suggested after a moment of silence. We can cover another few hours before nightfall. They resumed their journey toward Konoha, maintaining a vigilant watch for further divine servants or other threats. As they traveled, Tsubaki shared more information about the techniques she had developed over centuries of fighting the Divine Order, ways to disrupt divine energy, to seal smaller gateways, to recognize possessed individuals before they could cause harm. By nightfall, they had covered significant ground, and Hinata's Byakugan confirmed they were not being pursued. They made camp in a small clearing, establishing watches and settling in for a few hours of rest before continuing at dawn. During his watch, Naruto sat cross-legged at the edge of the clearing, the god-killer energy flowing calmly through his system as he processed everything he had learned. The repository had transferred vast amounts of knowledge, but it would take time to fully integrate and understand all of it. For now, he focused on the practical elements, the techniques and strategies developed by previous god-killers to counter divine incursions. You're adapting quickly, Tsubaki commented, joining him silently. It wasn't her watch yet, but she seemed to require less rest than either Naruto or Hinata. The repository helps, Naruto replied. It's like having memories of techniques I've never personally used, but understanding exactly how they work. Tsubaki nodded. That was its purpose. The last generation of god-killers knew their numbers were dwindling. They created the repository to ensure their knowledge wouldn't be lost, that future bloodline carriers would have the tools they needed when the Divine Order inevitably returned. She studied him in the moonlight that filtered through the forest canopy. But you're unusual even among god-killers. The combination of your bloodline with the Nine Tails chakra creates possibilities I've never seen before. Is that a good thing? Naruto asked. Potentially. The Divine Order fears it, which suggests they perceive a threat greater than what they've faced before. She smiled slightly. On the other hand, it makes you their primary target. They will throw everything they have at capturing or killing you. I'm used to being a target, Naruto said with a wry grin. Between Akatsuki hunting me for the Nine Tails and various other enemies over the years, being wanted dead isn't exactly a new experience. Tsubaki's expression turned serious. Don't underestimate them, Naruto. The Divine Order isn't like your human adversaries. They think in centuries, not moments. They plan with a patience and thoroughness that mortal minds struggle to comprehend. And they have resources beyond anything you've faced before. I understand the risk, Naruto assured her. But I also understand what's at stake. If they succeed in returning to our world, in making humans nothing but vessels for their consciousness. He shook his head. That's not a future I can accept. Good, Tsubaki said simply. Hold on to that resolve. You'll need it in the days ahead. She left him to finish his watch, moving silently back to where Hinata slept near the small, carefully concealed fire they had built. Naruto observed the interaction with interest. Tsubaki had been courteous but somewhat distant with Hinata, as if unsure how to relate to someone. Ho wasn't a god killer but had nonetheless proven effective against divine servants. By contrast, Hinata had been respectful but watchful, her natural politeness balanced by a shinobi's ingrained caution around powerful unknowns. She trusted Naruto's judgment in accepting Tsubaki's alliance, but maintained her own assessment of the situation. That balance, Hinata's grounded perspective complementing his more intuitive approach, had proven valuable throughout their partnership. As the god-killer heritage became a larger part of his identity, Naruto found himself increasingly grateful for her steady presence. Her ability to see things he might miss while caught up in the divine conflict. Dawn came too quickly, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the trees to find the three travelers already awake and preparing to complete their journey to Konoha. If they maintained a good pace, they would reach the village by early afternoon. As they packed up their minimal camp, Hinata approached Naruto, speaking quietly while Tsubaki checked the perimeter one final time. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her pale eyes searching his face with genuine concern. "Different," Naruto admitted. E-repository changed something fundamental. It's like, all these pieces that never quite fit together in my life suddenly make sense. The way I've always pushed against established systems, my ability to connect with people others had given up on. The god-killer heritage expressing itself, Hinata suggested. Exactly. Not just the energy or the markings, but a deeper purpose. He smiled ruefully. Though I could have done without adding, target of interdimensional divine entities, to my resume. Hinata returned his smile, though concern lingered in her eyes. Just remember, you don't have to face this alone. God-killer bloodline or not, you have people who will stand with you. The simple sincerity in her words touched him deeply. Throughout his life, Naruto had gone from the isolation of his childhood to the gradually expanding circle of friends and allies he now cherished. Even with this new divine heritage complicating matters, that foundation remained unchanged. "I know," he said softly, "and I'm counting on it. Whatever the divine order brings, we'll face it together." They set off at a steady pace, moving through the forest with the practiced efficiency of experienced shinobi. As they traveled, Tsubaki shared more of her knowledge about divine incursions, patterns she had observed over centuries, tactics the divine order typically employed, weaknesses in their strategies that could be exploited. They favor escalation, she explained as they leapt from branch to branch. Begin with small incursions to test defenses and establish footholds, then gradually increase the power and sophistication of the entities they send through. The masked figures and possessed villagers you encountered represent early stages. The servants we fought yesterday are mid-level threats. And the high-level threats? Naruto asked. Tsubaki's expression darkened. Heralds. Aspects. Occasionally, if a gateway is large enough, lesser primordials themselves. Entities of such power even god-killers at the height of their strength struggled to banish them. Have you faced such beings? Hinata inquired. Twice, Tsubaki replied, her voice tight with remembered strain. I survived, but barely. Without the full power of the bloodline, I could only drive them back temporarily, not defeat them outright. She glanced at Naruto. But with your strength, especially after bonding with the repository, we might actually stand a chance if such entities breach the barriers. The conversation lapsed into thoughtful silence as they continued their journey. By midday, they had reached familiar territory, forests that Konoha shinobi regularly patrolled. Hinata's Byakugan confirmed they were approaching a standard patrol route. We should be intercepted soon, she noted. Standard procedure when unknown individuals approach the village. Sure enough, within minutes they were met by a 4-person ambush squad that materialized from the forest canopy with the silent efficiency char. Characteristic of Konoha's elite special operations force. Identify yourselves, commanded the leader, a tall figure wearing a hawk mask. Naruto Uzumaki and Hinata Hyuga, returning from a mission to the land of rivers with critical information for the Hokage, Naruto replied formally. This is Tsubaki Yuru, an ally with knowledge vital to Konoha's security. The Anbu captain studied them, particularly Tsubaki, whose unfamiliar presence would naturally trigger caution. After a moment, he signaled to his team. You'll be escorted directly to the Hokage Tower, he said. Lady Tsunade is expecting a report from your team. Though she was informed you had split into 2 groups. Tenten and Ino should have returned yesterday with the initial findings, Hinata confirmed. Our information builds on theirs and requires immediate attention. Quote, the Anbu escort surrounded them in standard formation, 2 ahead, 2 behind, and guided them swiftly toward the village. As they approached Konoha's massive gates, Naruto felt a curious mixture of relief and apprehension. Home represented safety and strength, but also vulnerability, people he cared about who could become targets if the Divine Order decided to strike directly at him. Impressive defenses, Tsubaki commented as they passed through the gates, nodding to the barrier techniques and ceiling arrays that had been significantly enhanced since Pain's attack years earlier. Though they weren't designed with divine entities in mind, that can be addressed, Naruto replied with confidence. Konoha has some of the world's best ceiling experts, and the Uzumaki techniques incorporated into our defenses already have some effect against divine energy, even if their creators didn't fully understand the purpose. They were led directly to the Hokage Tower, villagers watching curiously as the Anbu escorted group moved through the streets. Naruto noted with amusement that his changed appearance, the more extensive markings visible on his skin, the golden red flecks in his eyes, was already drawing attention. News would spread quickly, as it always did in a village of ninja. At the Hokage Tower, they were brought immediately to Tsunade's office. Inside, they found not only the Hokage herself, but also Kakashi, Shikamaru, and, to Naruto's relief, Tenten and Ino, who had evidently completed their mission successfully. About time, Tsunade said by way of greeting, though her sharp eyes were already assessing the changes in Naruto's appearance. Tenten and Ino provided a preliminary report, but it's clear there have been significant developments since you separated. You could say that, Naruto agreed. He gestured to Tsubaki, who had been watching the room with the careful assessment of someone entering unfamiliar territory. This is Tsubaki Yuru. She carries the same god-killer bloodline as me, though she's had centuries more experience using it. All eyes turned to the newcomer, reactions ranging from Shikamaru's calculating assess meant to Kakashi's carefully neutral observation to Tsunade's frank appraisal. Centuries. The Hokage repeated, one eyebrow raised. Tsubaki inclined her head slightly. The bloodline extends lifespan considerably. I've spent the past 400 years countering divine incursions where I could, maintaining the seals between realms, and avoiding detection by the Divine Order's servants. And now, you've decided to join forces with Konoha, Tsunade said, neither accepting nor rejecting the implied alliance. Convenient timing. Necessary timing, Tsubaki corrected without taking offense. The awakening of Naruto's bloodline has accelerated the Divine Order's plans. What was once a slow, gradual infiltration is becoming a coordinated incursion. I can no longer operate effectively alone, nor would it be wise to try. Tsunade studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. We'll discuss your role in detail later. For now, I need a complete report on what you found after leaving the village in the Land of Rivers. For the next hour, Naruto, Hinata, and Tsubaki provided a comprehensive account of their journey to the Valley of the End, the discovery of the Godfall Temple, Naruto's bonding with the repository, and their subsequent battle with divine servants. Tenten and Ino contributed their own observations about the possessed village and the recovery efforts they had coordinated before returning to Konoha. When they finished, Tsunade leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled before her as she processed the information. So we're facing an interdimensional invasion by entities Hat-C humans is nothing more than potential vessels for their consciousness. And our primary defense is a bloodline that most people thought was merely legend, carried by exactly 2 individuals that we know of. That's the situation, Naruto confirmed. Troublesome doesn't begin to cover it, Shikamaru muttered, though his mind was visibly working through strategic implications. The divines say, Arvants we've encountered so far represent only the vanguard, Tsubaki warned. If we don't act quickly to secure key locations and strengthen the barriers between realms, we'll face entities of far greater power. And these key locations would be what, exactly? Kakashi asked. Natural thin points between realms, Tsubaki explained. Places where the boundaries are naturally weaker, often marked by unusual geological or energetic phenomena. The Valley of the End is one such location, which is why the God Killers built the Godfall Temple there, to monitor and reinforce the boundary. There are others throughout the shinobi world. She continued. Some known to me, others have only heard rumors of. Each represents a potential gateway that the Divine Order could exploit. So we need to identify these locations, secure them, and strengthen whatever barriers exist there, Tsunade summarized, while simultaneously preparing defenses against entities that can possess humans and create constructs like the Guardian you described. Quote, yes, Tsubaki agreed, and we need to do it quickly. The Divine Order has already established at least 2 footholds that we know of. There are likely others. Tsunade turned to Shikamaru. Begin compiling a list of unusual locations with the characteristics Tsubaki described. Focus on areas with historical anomalies or unexplained phenomena. Wheel cross. Reference with any intelligence we have on strange occurrences or disappearances. The strategic advisor nodded, already making notes. I'll coordinate with intelligence in the archives. The Nara Claw. N records might also contain relevant information. We've documented unusual chakra phenomena for generations. Kakashi, Tsunade continued, I want you to work with our sealing experts to review and enhance Konoha's defenses based on what we now know about divine energy. Use the Uzumaki techniques as a foundation but adapt them specifically for this threat. Understood, Kakashi replied. All Al, so reach out to contacts in other villages. If this threat is as widespread as it appears, we'll need coordinated efforts across the shinobi world. Tsunade nodded her approval, then focused on Naruto. As for you, you're our primary asset in this conflict, but also potentially our greatest vulnerability. The repository has enhanced your abilities, but you're still learning to control them. I want you working directly with Tsubaki to master these God Killer techniques as quickly as possible. Already planned on it, Naruto assured her. And Hinata, Tsunade added, your Byakugan's ability to detect divine energy and your effectiveness against these entities makes you a critical part of this effort. I'm assigning you to continue working with Naruto and Tsubaki, both for reconnaissance and combat support. Hinata nodded, her posture straightening slightly at the recognition of her contributions. I'll do my best, Lady Tsunade. The Hokage stood, signaling that the initial briefing was concluded. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning with our preliminary findings and begin developing a comprehensive strategy. Until then, Tsubaki will be provided accommodations within the village, and all of you should rest and recover. The challenges ahead will require you at full strength. As they filed out of the office, Naruto felt both the weight of responsibility and a curious sense of rightness settling upon him. The God Killer bloodline had awakened within him for a purpose, to stand against a threat that few others could even perceive, let alone combat. It was a destiny that aligned ably well with the path he had already chosen as a shinobi dedicated to protecting others. Whatever the Divine Order planned, whatever entities might emerge from the weakening barriers between realms, he would meet them with the combined strength of his Uzumaki heritage, his Jinchuriki power, and now his God Killer bloodline. And he wouldn't stand alone. The battle for humanity's free will had begun anew, and this time, the God Killers would not fade into legend. This time, they would win. Chapter 2 End.